Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I would like to address you in regards to a very simple concept, and that is the answer to the question, can you deliver on promises in a workable and fair system that has a sense of stability, loyalty, reliability, and a capacity to protect and the ability to maintain and to offer encouragement and a sense of banishing the negativities that tend to arise when we are met with challenges, and a sense of vitality and longevity and perseverance. I believe that any system that exists in the natural world has as its founding ideal, when we humans observe it, this concept of enormous unspendable wealth and a sense of righteousness. Like, this is right, this is the way things just are and the way they ought to be. And the struggle that we have as humans is, how can we build systems that have that sense of nature involved in it so much that it's aligned and in tuned with that natural sense of the natural workings of the material world, the way that our universe is just so easily and profoundly, intentionally patterned. And when we look at the ways that we build out systems, there's always got to be some sort of catch to it. It's these sense that we have to trade off some of our wants and to let go of some of our needs in order for us to just get at something that can just get us through. It works good enough for now. In all my considerations of the concept of business, I see a lot of that type of stuff in the establishment of how people go about approaching business. Is that there's this sense of, we just got to get something and get it out the door as fast as possible so we can start generating money, and then we can go back and we can really set everything straight in the way that we want it to be. We just got to start off right away and start making something so that we're profitable. And I totally understand that, because the more that you have income generation, the more capacity you have to do things to be able to build out. But the problem with that is the issue of pivoting a system once it's started. The concept is the first impression that your company gives is kind of setting the tone for which everything will proceed. And so it's important to establish the sense that you know where you're going and you know what you're trying to accomplish, and you're willing to do what it takes to get there, even if it means that you have to take the slow and steady process, because of the fact that it's important that you hold true to the original spirit of intent. And I believe that thinking about the founding of America, our founding fathers had this concept in their head, right, of the original spirit of intent of its founding. A lot of bad things were happening in constraining and limiting their options. The rights were being infringed, their liberties were being, reduced, and there was an increasing encroachment of this sinister state that started taking over and bossing everybody around, telling them what to do, what to think, what to feel, which was strange to these people who said, wait a second, we promised ourselves and each other that we would take this very dangerous journey to come to America and to put our life and, you know, our riches and our skills and our capabilities to work for the development of this new world. And we, in doing so, we're under the obvious, you know, impression in this sense of like contracting, you know, this agreement amongst people that that's what we're about, that's what we're going to go do. And we know it's going to be difficult and it's going to be a struggle, but it's worth it to us because of the sense in our head that it was like, you know, we wanted the daring, we wanted the adventure, we wanted to know that, you know, we were going to go somewhere and try to do something that had never been done before, set things new. What if we had a blank slate? And what could be done with it? Especially if you're leaning on the enormous power of everybody working towards the same spirit, the same sense of like, this is what we're about, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to approach it in a sense of like commonalities. And so when the founding fathers of the United States of America decided that the system which brought them and all people to the Americas, and that they were willing to put in the good effort and the work to establish, started to creep in with this tyrannical, you know, system of oppressions, there were many people that were like, I'm not okay with this. You know, we had people like Thomas Paine and whatnot who like wrote these, I guess, reasonable narratives to individuals who were like, this shouldn't be our lot in life, you know? And to speak to the people in such a way where they're like, you know, maybe they weren't so happy with the way things were, but what were they enabled or empowered or capable of doing to change that system, you know? It's kind of like if you just keep your head down low and you just kind of like deal with what you got, work with what you got, somehow you were just going to get along. And it was much easier to, as the Declaration of Independence says, you know, live with those grievances and, you know, while they're livable. But then something happened that was just like, this is not reasonable anymore, guys. Like, way too long have we just had these infringements, things are not working to what we had thought they were supposed to be, so we need to set things right. But what would right look like? What would be reasonable? What would be just? What would be fair? And so our founding fathers, you know, on the concept of, you know, it was essentially rich white men that decided they didn't want to have to pay taxes anymore, decided, okay, we're going to, you know, scratch that, clean slate, this is now what we're going to do. And from that sense, they were able to coalesce around that idea of, you know, liberty, which that's the principle that I see as when you look layers deep into, you know, what they were really talking about. It wasn't just about the, you know, taxation without representation. It wasn't just about, you know, increasing the taxes to pay for a war, you know, that like you didn't even want to involve with, and it certainly shouldn't be incumbent on us few to pay for something so massive. And, you know, you're taxing us to starvation. This is not a sustainable system, and you're not allowing us to reasonably, you know, negotiate with you and the terms and the conditions of our unity with you and, you know, our alliance and our allegiance and our, you know, pledge that, all right, we're going to be a part of this together and work on things together. And, you know, there was a breaking point in all of that. And they were just like, you know, the more that they say in this arbitrary scheme that they've decided, you have to pay taxes for this and you've got to pay taxes for that, and we're going to, you know, limit the justice system so that there really isn't any way to have a corrective mechanism for what happened that makes you mad or, you know, disappoints you or takes away your rights in one way or another. And all of the decision-making power goes into one very tyrannical, corrupt individual that's not operating in a sense of caring about others, but rather a very selfish sense of having nothing better to do but to limit the options of others. And because, being a leader, it's difficult. How are you going to figure out how you're going to, run a nation or run an empire or whatever, especially when there's multiple people? And there's a lot to it. It's the concept that I really appreciate, in the sense of a quote that is one of my favorite quotes, that essentially Doggerel Sum Up says that to overturn the world, it's very easy. It takes one finger can overturn the world, but it takes the shoulders of Hercules to administer to the world. And I feel like there's a point in time when government gets too, out of the realm of control for any one person to do, that's not able to administer in the ways that are necessary. And so they start to shrink things down to size, so they have very powerful leverages, so they can have more control over what's happening. And it's reasonable to want to do that, because that sense of needing to control everything prevents others from doing things that you can't quite anticipate. You can then just say, I don't know what you're going to do or when you're going to do it or how you're going to do it, but I'm going to capture these arbitrary schemes of saying, if you do the wrong thing in this way, then I'm going to be able to limit your capacity to step out of line any further. And this is what happens when people don't have the conscious consideration of, well, how do you administer in such a way that's like just, fair, reasonable, and right? What would be best suited for all parties involved? What would be able to build goodwill and friendships? And what would be based off of the truth that we're all living in, and be in a reasonable way that is suited to the best outcomes for all parties involved? And that is with a sense of knowing that what you're doing has the purpose ultimately to make sure that just everything can be in accord, right? Settled in such a way that we have nothing better to do with our time but to just live out in perpetual sense of togetherness. And we don't live in that system right now. We didn't live in that system then. And our liberties were reduced and reduced and reduced. And no way do we consciously see liberty most directly, and it impacts your life, than through the concept of economy. And that's why the taxation without representation was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. There was lots of grievances, but it was just kind of like, you know what? This is not going to be acceptable anymore. What are we going to do to move on from here? And so the idea was, in that sense, in the sense of liberty, right? In the sense of a liberty being about economy, it is so easy to be able to coalesce everyone around that idea of, impoverishment, or, unnecessary struggle, or this massive chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and the sense of the struggle that is so real and unescapable, and the fact that living in such severe want makes people desperate. There grew, at the founding of our nation, this infectious rebellion. And our founding fathers tapped into that rebellion and said, listen, guys, I know what's happening right now is bullshit. And it doesn't need to be this way. And it shouldn't be this way. We're reasonable people, and we have a sense that there's better ways to govern than to do it through force, through tyranny and through limitations and through corruptions and through, these arbitrary schemes that are easily turned against you if you don't fall in line. Where one day you can be on the side of, systems aren't going to be used against you because you're just living your life and you're doing your thing. And then all of the sudden, some wild hair gets at the, you know, the leaders are like, you know what, I don't like those particular people or what they're doing or what they're about. I'm going to outcast them, and I'm going to use my systems of power to attack them. And whether that's through, like campaigns to try to take away the credibility of somebody, or to break down the systems of reliable systems that people have based their reputations on, or to attack the things that are easy to turn into specters. Like, this is the thing that you're really mad at, and get everybody to turn on one another because they've been incited into this sense of rage, and that outrage is then directed towards other people that are easily, targeted as being an other. And, it's us versus them mentality. And so our founding fathers tapped into that sense. They saw it being used against them, by this foreign entity that was trying to say that all you will ever be is what we have made you out to be, instead of allowing you to just be true to who you are. Freedom in the free world was being established in the Americas. A land too big to be bound. And the people came here with the hope and the promise that by our hands, by our efforts, by our capabilities, by our willingness to do whatever it takes, we're going to work together to make something new. And so it was kind of like arrogant, of this big entity from across the ocean to say from a distance that, we are going to limit your options. We're going to take away your sense of liberties and your sense of freedoms and your sense of rights and your sense of, self-determination, even though we convinced you to go there based off of you'll have more liberty, you'll have more freedom, you'll have more rights, you'll have more self-determination. By your own will and your own want and your own way, you were going to build up America into this new world. And that was being taken away from them because, again, it was the concentration of power to put it into very strong leverages that a finger could overturn the entire world. And so our founding fathers were just like, let's take the same concept of, pointing to the problem and coalesce people around it and tap into that infectious rebellion, the same infectious spirit that brought people here to Americas to, declare themselves, free and liberated and self-determined, all of these wonderful things, independent, right? We're going to reclaim that sense, because that really ultimately was what was rubbing them wrong. That was the friction that was created, was the fact that no, you can't give us a thing and then take it away and say, that thing that I promised that you were going to have, you can't have anymore because it's too out of hand and I can't control it from a distance. And I need to control it because I have to use you for my own ends, because, this is all about me building something that doesn't necessarily benefit you. It benefits a few. And so we broke away from that. We said, everybody, your rights are being limited, your liberties are being infringed upon. You are no longer living in the reality that you thought was the original spirit of us coming here. That has been taken away from you from these arbitrary schemes that are done from a distance, leveraging, you out of favor of benefiting from your own efforts, And so we declared our independence from that BS, and we determined that no, we're going to be a nation that is founded on the principle of independence. We are independent, we are free, and we are a righteous nation. The concept of we are one nation under a God indivisible, meaning that there's nothing above our sense of unity as a nation but the highest order of a God indivisible. Nothing can tear us apart, that brings us together. And it wasn't like a secular God. It wasn't like a specific types of religion that what they meant when they said God. They were more talking about this sense of this higher order of the universe. There was one thing that was higher order than the laws of man, and that's, the God, indivisible, the thing that was a first order of the universe, the way things proceed from the natural patterning of the universe. And that's what we were determining was our sense of righteousness. Like, we are going to align ourselves with that, and we're going to say that we're free and we are independent, but we are part of something much larger than any one of us can do alone. And we know that. And it's because we respect our independence. Our sovereignty holds true. It is that independence that actually holds us together. That was the original intended spirit of our founding principles of our nation. And so with that, it's like, how could the founding fathers give us something that could be an enduring promise that says that no matter what happens, we will continue to be an ever more perfect union, because we are going to promise ourselves to do a certain set of things as we grow in our becoming process of this new nation that is intended to be enduring and everlasting. We determined we were going to be an ever more perfect union, which means that we were going to organize ourselves, as our Declaration of Independence said, as which we saw is most suited to our benefit and to our happiness. And that would have to befit the times. You can't operate on old models and expect anything good to come out of that, because it's not reasonable to think that things were always going to stay the same. The only true constant is change. And so they understood that and they knew that. And then they wrote this guideline to say, like, this is what we're going to use to help kind of like keep us in a sense of like, all right, how can we do in a reasonable way an arrangement of sorts that is mutually beneficial, that can keep us all kind of like reined in. We're all independent, we all have our liberties, and we all have our freedoms, but we do rely on one another, and what makes us a nation is our independence united interdependently and coalesce around the sense of our unity is our bond, and what brings us together can never tear us apart. And so we constituted that in a document that said, we are the people of the United States. Me, you, them, everyone that's come before and everyone that is going to come in the future. We are Americans. We are U.S. Americans. And we are the people that make up this nation. And we decided, we're going to form a more perfect union, meaning that it's a never-ending process. More perfect, this sense of like, great, weird, simple analogy of having a pencil, right? You have a pencil and you sharpen that pencil, and it has a perfect point, right? But over time, as you use that pencil and you write things down, there comes a point in time where that starts to get dull because of use, and you find yourself needing to refresh that. And so the concept is you still are trying to achieve the same sharp point, very precise point, so you can have that fine tip, but you're going to have to sharpen it. And as you sharpen it over time, it's going to eventually shrink and shrink and shrink. But you can always get another pencil, resharpen it, and then you have another tool to be able to write with precision. So the idea is like, over time, it's going to be the same thing that we're going for. We need that precision point of, direction that we're moving towards. But as we use these instruments, over time they're going to be worn down. And so when you think of it, this is what laws are about. You use them until they're no longer functional, and then you adopt new ones. But again, still getting at that same point. And so if we have an ever-perfecting union, we have our trajectory set, we know that the simple basic truth of what we're trying to get at here, guys, was established in the preamble to the Constitution. And the Declaration of Independence told us what we're not going to stand for. We refuse to stand for that kind of stuff, you know? And to use that in the framework of our understanding of what we're trying to get at. But the how we do those sorts of things is part of the ever more perfect union, in a sense of, we create laws that are necessary, befit the times. We understand the times and what is best fitted. The fittest of the moment is, our situational context, our historical context, and our fine context where we find ourselves now. And then also understanding where we're trying to go, having a sense of vision and like approach, right? That point of approach. And so laws are supposed to be able to help to be this kind of like framing in our distinctions so that we can readily understand, the outline of what we're trying to get to, this future outline, but then also the terms and the conditions of our mutual agreement that this is what we're going to be about and this is how we're going to go about doing it. And because we can't all agree on everything all the time, because there are going to be conflicting interests, we need to have corrective mechanisms in there in order to make sure that, selfish interests are not taking over the systems that we've created for ourselves and just moving them in a direction that doesn't necessarily serve the best interests of all parties involved. It leads people in a direction that, we may not necessarily recognize that that's where we're going until it's a little bit too late, or that we see ourselves going there and we refuse to participate, or we recognize that that's actually going to be on a continuum of negative outcome consequences to which we may never recover. And the whole point here, the whole point of the exercise is for us to remain an ever more perfect union. And so that was what our founding fathers said. Listen, we know things are going to change. We have to move in a direction befit the times along with that change. How can we set up corrective mechanisms so that we know that we are moving in a general sense the direction that we would all want to go, within reason. And so we established this sense of voting, and in that we were going to vote for the type of people that we believed represented our best interests and that was willing to put in the effort, the time, the effort, and the energy to produce a productivity in a certain definite direction, be in service to the best interest of those whom which they represent and whom entrusted them to be that representative, and to work together with people from all parties and across every aisle and different backgrounds and different interests and whatnot, to be able to find the common ground, the through line, the thing that establishes the point by which we can take all our contentions and all our conflicts of interest and wrap them into a mutual agreement for mutual interests and mutual securities. And so our systems of voting was supposed to kind of be that means. We were able to overthrow a government at the ballot box instead of at war. But now you see, is like even present day, which isn't it really just tragic? We have an administration that is trying to skirt rules and to pervert interpretations of our ways that we organize in such a way that can skew to do things like gerrymandering, to be able to draw district lines in order to essentially disenfranchise certain populations of people, certain demographics of people, in order to concentrate the power of election into the hands of people that they are most easily to skew, because they can get them into alignment with their interests by simply catering to a sense of the, sensibilities of people in that particular area. Very easy to incite those people to, want to stand up for the cause of, we're going to elect a person that's going to stand up for us in this way or represent us in this way. And so it's a manipulation of the system. And it's not based off of trying to make sure there's fair and equal representation, but rather like, how can they favor themselves or favor the interests of a few? And again, disenfranchise, disenfranchise certain people so that they don't have the representation of the voice of reason that is in service to helping to improve their lives. They're going to be able to stand there in, the chambers of decision making, of representation, and be able to accurately and thoroughly, negotiate the terms and conditions of what new laws are going to be implied, corrected for, created, in order to make sure that everybody's collective interests are preserved, protected, and defended. And so, and the fact that the current president, POTUS 47, decides he wants to even just joke around because he thinks it's funny in some regard, because, he likes the idea of trolling people because it gives him a good laugh, makes him feel good about himself, to play on those notions of fear and discrimination, and for his despoiled discernment, and his very poor sense of jurisprudence in terms of interpreting the Constitution, to the fact that he thinks that he has the right to even joke about staying in office beyond this 4 years of his current term. Even though our Constitution says that he no longer qualifies to be elected president because we have a 2-term limit that is written into our Constitution. And so he's trying to lay the groundwork and the framework, and he's trying to get, decision makers all aligned with his sense of, well, maybe we can just take away the 4 years and we can just have it indefinite. Or maybe we can say that, elections can, we don't need elections anymore, which is something that he was suggesting in, his campaign, platitudes as he was campaigning to become president, POTUS 47. Elect me and we'll never have to worry about elections ever again. And so I think that that's a really dangerous ground, of course. It's not funny, especially from somebody who says that he wants to be a dictator, and he really is like creating such a sense. He's threatening lawmakers if they don't align with him. He is bad-mouthing and discarding and disassociating and attacking his own base that elected him into office, because they are upset that he's not following through on one of his, campaign promises of releasing the Epstein files. And I think ultimately what that shows is that his interests aren't about protecting innocence. His interests are about protecting the powerful people who may have to face consequences for their poor decision making. And the fact that he's not willing to do what it takes in order to make sure that justice is served, to make sure that the victims and the perpetrators are made whole and are able to live in society, in a sense of like, we have rectified the situation, we have redeemed it, and now we can realign ourselves back into a sense of unity because we've gotten past that challenge. He's not interested in looking at justice that way. He sees justice as a way to judge others, to punish others, to limit their options and their choices. And so he's, of course, afraid of that. And that's why he fought so desperately to fight against all of the court cases that were brought against him. But in nowhere did he ever even respect the legal process. You know, how many times when, you know, he was going through this, you know, lawsuit of, you know, against the woman who came out and said, you know, he sexually violated her. In that entire process, instead of being an honorable, respectful, dignified man who had the integrity to stand his ground and say, I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm willing to let this case be heard out because my reputation isn't at stake here. What's at stake is making sure that the truth comes out, however that it needs to come out. You know, and just holding true to the fact that I'm a man of integrity and I know that the truth will in time reveal itself. You know, be of course upset, like, gosh, you know, it really is unfortunate when people decide to attack you, you know, attack your credibilities or the things you base your reputation on. But he wasn't willing to do that. Instead, he roused his base. It's a witch hunt, you know, just like he complained about, you know, the Russia investigation from his first, you know, election into office. You know, like, there really was Russian interference. There's no doubt in anybody's reasonable mind that that happened. And it wasn't a matter of, like, attacking the legitimacy of his presidency that I think really was the core problem of that. It was just like, we need to make sure that we don't have exterior influences coming in and corrupting our systems in order for foreign interests to manipulate and skew outcomes into their favor, because they read Trump as somebody that would be easily manipulated, because he is, you know, because he's a man who's so desperate when he gets into a corner, he will throw money at a problem. You know, he will, like, go out of alignment with any sense of soul print values or virtues, and he's willing to do dark and sinister things, and he will attack others instead of, you know, taking the dignified course. And it's reasonable, again, to want to defend yourself, but there's a very, very big difference between defending yourself and calling out other people's bullshit and saying, you know, this wasn't just, this wasn't fair, this wasn't reasonable, this wasn't right. Voice your opinions of the matter and your outlooks on things and whatnot, but do so in a way that you can remain integrity bound. And just Trump has proven himself time and time again he can't. You know, in these court cases, he was found in contempt. You know, he ended up, you know, with the you know, essentially fraud schemes on all the counts that were gone against him, and he's a convicted felon for the way that he handled, you know, mishandled money and then, you know, hid it from the world to be able to hide the fact that he may or may not have had a relationship with a woman, because it would have come across, you know, to, you know, people who claim to be conservative that, you know, he shouldn't have cheated on his wife, especially with a porn star. And so he paid this hush money to be able to, you know, keep that on the down low, so voters were not actually informed of the facts of the situation. He ended up getting in trouble for it, you know. But then you look at the history of his business, and how you do anything is how you do everything. And he is a con artist. I mean, that's who he is as a person. And so everything that he's done has been, you know, based off of this conning people. You know, he's a con man. And he's not even very good at it, in a sense of, like, his most effective weapon for approaching, you know, convincing people of things is to attack people and troll them and belittle them and create an us versus them mentality, you know, and throw people under the bus, just like he's throwing his, you know, his followers, you know, past followers. You're not my followers anymore, because people are outraged for the fact that he's not willing just to do what seems just, fair, reasonable, and right. Just release the Epstein files, man, you know? And I want those to be released, not for the fact that I want, you know, vengeance, and I want correction. I want justice, you know, for all parties involved. And I want to do so in such a way that we can hopefully, like, mend the rift that is obvious in our nation, where people don't know if they can trust their government to do the right thing in order to protect innocence, and to protect their interests. And I think what's going on in the back of the mind of a lot of these people who are like, what's going on, and they're upset about this particular situation. It's just a manifestation of this uncertainty and this fear and this doubt that's coming through. It says, wow, if this person who we've entrusted is not able to follow through on his commitments, and is willing to skirt the rules, and is willing to literally throw anybody under the bus that's necessary, even his most ardent loyalists, because it means so much to him to be right and in control and in power, and whatever promises that he's made in backroom deals to whoever he's trying to protect in this case, which obviously isn't the innocence of the world, to make sure that we don't have to worry about these bad actors with nefarious intent who did bad things to innocent young women, are able to make those poor decisions again, and effectively they're getting off scot-free. And so I think, that's the reasonable aspect of it, is like, people are like, wait a second, man, what are we even doing here? If you're not willing to just do this thing, which you once said was totally reasonable, I'll do that, But then if you remember, and I remember very clearly, he's sitting down in an interview, and somebody's like, will you release the Epstein files? And he said yes. And then he sits down in another interview not too long ago, long after that, all of a sudden his tone changed, and he's like, well, there's a lot of people, good people, that, reputations are at stake, sort of thing. Maybe, not possible, but, And so he was really already flip-floppy about the concept. And so the point I'm trying to make isn't about the, Epstein files directly. It's just the thing that we can frame the concept around, like, is Trump a trustworthy and reliable person? I don't think he is. So then this comes into the concept of, like, can you deliver on your promises? And I think that any person who wants to be a leader of any type, whether you are starting a business to be able to lead a crack team of amazing individuals who are brilliant and devoted and, determined, and are willing to, bring their capabilities of human ingenuity to the table and just make amazing things happen together, like magic, performative magic, in a sense of, like, through this development of business, which is, again, part of economy, which is, again, part of our liberty. It's a beautiful way for us to have this capacity to freely move about and freely discover which ways can we, move our nation in, the world and civilization in these different new and fascinating directions. Or if you're a leader of, a local government or state government or even federal government, like, being in service to people, saying, listen, I know that we have to create the right type of parameters by which we can operate in. And we need to understand that administration is crucial to maintaining our independence and to upholding our sense of constitution and to living by the original spirit and intent of our founding, and to make sure we achieve that ever more perfect union. We need to have these rules and these regulations that define our terms and our conditions, our willingness to involve, our capacity to correct systems, our sense that we need to, like, sometimes pull things in a certain direction, or need to push back on things that are kind of trying to encroach, that are going to limit our capacity to get things worked out in a safe space. And so, lawmakers are really supposed to be about understanding this, scenario universe that we're operating in, and how might we distinguish, our context of where we've been and why we had those laws before, and where we're going, and are our laws that we currently have reasonable, in the sense of, like, how we find ourselves capable in the moment, and then the trends that we're building out through our economy, through our innovations, through the brilliant minds of, every individual that is here to participate and contribute to America. and where we're intending to go. And when you look at like a lot of the lawmakers that have been voted into office have been coalescing around Trump, because he's like, I'm gonna lead the way in the charge. Follow me, guys. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I know what we're gonna be about. And they see him as this strong man, and they're so desperate for somebody to come in and run the show, because things have not been working for everybody. There's all these grievances, and the people on the left are too powerful, the people on the right are too powerful, and the sense of like, this is what's wrong, and we're going to set things right. And so all of these people get around him, but they're championing for a man that really isn't worthy of your devotions. He's not worthy your attentions or your interests. He's a showman. He's a performative con artist that is willing to tell you whatever you want to hear, whatever you need to hear in the moment, in order for him to capture your attention, capture your mind, capture your heart, and in that, use the trust that he's built with this, I've watched it before, read it before, this sense of like you gain relationships and trusts with actors in movies and things like that. Your fan base ends up becoming so, they believe you to be the actual actor in that role, rather than just an actor performing it or whatever. And Trump's very much convinced people that he's the man he's made himself out to be in his performative role. I'm a professional businessman and I'm so successful and I've done all these things, and the Trump show is on 24/7. And so he's laying out this role and he's relating people to the role. But when you look at the man, you look how he talks, you look at the things that he focuses on, the things that he cares about, you look into his heart and you see the attitude and the direction of his heart and where it's going in terms of like, how he chooses to show up in the world. It's not anything that you would want to base, trust on. There's no assurances that what he's offering is any sense of stability, and things that aren't built off of trust and integrity and truth eventually will break away. And so what he's really, doing to America, he's not serving, he's not doing for you as a government, representative. He's doing to you. And what he's doing to you is setting you up for failure in the future. He's not thinking about redemption. He's not thinking about, how can we create corrective mechanisms so we can, turn this story around, turn it from a tragedy into a triumph, He doesn't have the sense of like how to work things out into the favor of best interests of all parties involved. And it's just a one-man show, and it's all about me, 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 me. It's very selfish. Again, I label him a part of the deviant echelon of society. It's the people who are self-centered and selfish and are focused on their own needs and wants and outcomes, to the point that's so excessive that they forget to consider others. And so he's not trustworthy. Nothing that he creates is going to be stable. It's not going to be able to instill a sense of loyalty, because already look, his base, he's kicking them to the curb. He's throwing them under the bus, because they're not loyal to the cause of just following him into the darkness of, don't worry guys, I know the truth, and just listen to me and I'm going to get you there. And okay, reasonable if he really truly knows, but don't you think it would be more reasonable to like shine the light so everybody can see, instead of leaving everybody dependent upon him and what he knows more than anybody else? It's about waking everybody up to the realization of like, this is really what we're all about, and he's not doing that. And so the loyalty and the fidelity and the faithfulness that he is demanding from people, and if you don't, you're kicked to the curb, is to him. It's not even to a cause. It's not even to some higher purpose. It's not to achieve this future outlining of a vision that's to come. It's about him. And I think that there's lots of people that were just really desperate to get out of the situation that we're in, that we saw walls closing in on us and our, options limited and our liberties being infringed upon and our rights just not working the right way. Desperate for somebody that was going to come in and change it. And Trump was the man that was standing there and saying, look at me. I'll be whatever you need me to be right now in the moment, And he doesn't have a spine to stand tall. He doesn't know what he stands for. He doesn't have a soul print alignment. And so he's weak. His arguments are weak. His justifications are weak. His sensibilities are weak. And I'm not here trying to attack his weakness, like saying, come on, everybody, turn on Trump, But I do want to have people come into a better perspective about Trump. I don't think that he's the best person to lead our nation. I think that he's getting, ideas from all these other people are like, oh, if we just do these things and we finally have the, leverages of control of the nation and we're going to be able to conform it to what we want, Project 2025, And I think that there's some sense of like, yeah, we need to make changes, and some of the things that people present is reasonable, not necessarily how they present it. But it's okay to want to improve our nation. That's what a leader's supposed to do. Like, hey guys, I got a plan. We're going to move in this direction. We're going to do these things. But while Trump was in office, he rejected the notion of Project 2025 because he was too afraid to stand up and say that's really what he wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, you elected me, joke's on you. Like him and a bunch of his, cohort that are now a part of his administration say, it's like, joke's on you guys. That's been the Project 2025. It's been the idea all along. So much that they were so, ashamed of what they were doing, and they had to be so non-transparent about it that they had to lie and weren't going to show people what they were working on until it was too late for people to realize, what you thought we were doing over here was just a distraction, so that you weren't paying attention to the fact that what we were really doing is this. It was all a ruse. It was all a disguise. And so I think that because of that sense, nothing that he's offered has a sense of longevity to it. He can't even keep straight about his stories of what he's doing. Tariffs are a great example. He changes his mind about those all the time. And now he's using it as an intimidation factor against people. Like, for instance, he's obviously going the wrong approach to addressing the war in Ukraine because of his relationship that he's choosing to have with Russia. I'm grateful that it finally dawned on him, whatever voice of reason came in and made sense to him, that he needed to help to, provision the armaments for Ukraine to be able to defend itself, in a reasonable way. I think that was a good move. I don't think that stemmed off of his brilliant strategic intelligence, but rather just the fact that he was pissed off, and it was a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that he realized that Putin's been puppeteering him this whole time. And now he's seeing that he's being made a laughingstock by this foreign nation that has been able to convince the world that Trump somehow has some sort of good relationship with them, and so he was going to be able to find some sort of lasting path to peace. And then when Trump's in office, they played the game of appealing to his sensibilities of his own ego, and were able to outwit him time and time again, to the point where Trump just consistently gets made out to be a fool for his decision making. And now Trump is trying to say, we're going to go all in with 100%, tariffs against Russia if they don't abide by our demands. 50-day countdown, it's on. I imagine like Trump has changed his countdown for the tariffs being implemented to other nations. That's going to change, and it's not going to be changed based off of sitting down at a negotiation table and reasonably arguing with this. It's going to be kind of like what he did with, the other nations that he's trying to punish and submit to his will. He's just going to send a letter to them and be like, I'm not negotiating, I'm telling you what to do. I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. And I'm America, mighty power, and so you have to bend to my will. And Trump very much has that attitude. You can't have that attitude with Russia, And it's not because they're unreasonable in every regard. I just think that they have a very inflated ego to the point where they know that they have amassed power, and they've been making connections in the back room and amassing these alliances, and so they have gotten themselves into a position of cockiness. It's not confidence, it's cockiness. And Trump thinks I can be cocky too because America's so powerful and I can wield all that at you from a distance, and that's not confidence either. I think that it is a very dangerous place to confuse those two. And I think that that's what Russia's doing. I think that that's what Trump's doing. And that's why they seem to be, in some sense, able to be friendly with one another, because they're both operating off of that sense of misunderstanding the difference between confidence and cockiness. And, again, not to attack, but to understand that's their starting point, and you have to work from that place in a sense of coming at them and appealing to their interests, not stroking their ego and inflating it and playing nicey, but understanding what you are trying to project as strength. There are inherent weaknesses to that, and we recognize the instability of that position that you've placed yourself in. And while you may have accumulated this type of power, the fundamental point by which that is all setting on can pivot out of your favor with a very simple rule. And so that is a point where it can work to the advantage of making them not in a fear-based way approach solution, but say, okay, let's reasonably come to the negotiating table and say, I know that my strength is very much dependent on something that is actually inherently a weakness. And because of that, we can recognize that together we can build an integrity that can strengthen the interests of all parties involved. And from that, operate from a space where our decision making is best suited to make sure that we are all working out what will be in the best interest of all parties involved. I think that was kind of the spirit and intent that we've approached with having, the mutually assured destruction with, nuclear weapons, was just at a touch of a button, we can end it all. And would you do it if you were left to your own devices? It's the thing that refrains them from doing so that is their reasonableness. And I think everybody has that position. We just have to orient ourselves in that common ground, and from there build up an understanding. But I don't think that's going to be able to happen if Trump, the person who's supposed to be able to make those decisions, cannot let go of his ego defense to the point where he will flare it up and threaten somebody, that has just as much power to inflict harm as well. I think the reasonable way is to build something together that can help us to find a way to orient in a more, conducive to well-being relationship. And that really has to involve Ukraine. They have to be able to be the ultimate decision makers, because what America is doing by helping Ukraine to defend itself is to assert to the world our distinction of the value of sovereignty and independence. It's upholding the same value of principles we defined and founded ourselves upon. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, Everyone's created equal. And we don't want to live in a world where we're conflicting with one another in our interests. We want to be able to find a way to work together, to work out our problems. And I would really like to have Ukraine come back into its full glory. I would really like Russia to come back into its full glory. But that doesn't mean to, take back some, ancient concept of ownership of empire, and, it's not about land and that possession. It's about prestige, It's about having that integrity. It's about having that sense of enormous wealth. And I'm not just talking about money. A wealth of ideas, a wealth of possibilities, a wealth of opportunities. And within that also have righteousness. To know that we are all reasonably orienting ourselves to what is just, what is fair, what is reasonable, what is right. And I don't think Putin, who's willing to go in and bomb all of these places, to steal away children, to violate innocence, to destroy history, to subdue people with fear, to make them live in perpetual fear, to disturb the domestic order, to, forcefully conform people to their model and ideology. None of those things represent what is just, what is fair, what is reasonable, what is right. There's no care to that at all. It's about conformity, and it's about control. It's about power, it's about violence. And none of those things are integrity bound. And if you really truly want to build something that's peaceful, it has to literally be about restoration of integrities and distinguishing and defining and outlining and parametering and to, adding terms and conditions and guidelines and visions and mutual interests, mutual securities, mutual benefits that align in the terms of the sensibility. This is for me as much as it is for you. And what we're about is, settling ourselves to a natural, spontaneous cooperation towards the restoration of integrities constantly, so that we can make ourselves whole. There has to be a point in time that we are looking towards and we are trying to conform ourselves to, where, the stupid labor of the work that has to be done in order to find ourselves in accordance gets us to a place where we're safe, we're sound. We can lay our heads on our pillow at night and know that what we're working on and what we're working towards is something that we can be proud of. We can tell our kids about it, and for it to make sense, and for us to not come across as being, this negative thing to anyone. It's literally building up this brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity, and doing so together, so that we can achieve, the supreme excellence that is capacitated within human, potential and human ingenuity. To actualize our highest potential, we really have to intentionally align ourselves and our interests to these sense and conformities of reasonableness. And that's going to take us, breaking down our sense of these ego's worthless defense, which tends to flare up, conflict and create these legit cycles of conflict. And not legit in a sense of like it's the right thing to do, but legit like it really is. This is a conflict cycle that we're in, and the only way to get out of that conflict cycle is to transcend our current experience, and ascend from that into something that's a higher order relationship with one another. And the only way to do that is to build out what that's going to be about, determine together what those integrities are going to be. And that's what the world courts are supposed to be about. This is what the UN alignments are supposed to be. This is what NATO was supposed to be about. It's not just about coming together to protect and defend, but it's define and distinguish, right? To say this is what we're going to be about. And this is what we're going to be for. Not always what we're going to be against, but this is what we're going to be for, and this is what we're not going to stand for. You know, there's limits to everything. And that knowing there's corrective mechanisms for when things get out of line, you know, and then inviting people who we want to build with, everyone, inviting those who are deviant, who are self-centered, or are thinking about themselves and their legacy and their future and what they're going to be all about, into an experience that we can build upon together in positive cooperation. And to let that be about, you know, something that can establish stability, domestic order, tranquility. You know, tranquility is also about the sense of like, I don't have to worry about, you know, suspicion of my government. I don't have to worry about suspicion of my neighbor. I don't have to worry about suspicion of, you know, some foreign interests coming in and invading. I don't have to worry about those sorts of things, because I know that all reasonable people, those who I like to say make up the criterion echelon of society, we're all about doing this together. We're all about making the world work for 100% of the people here in the shortest time possible, you know, through spontaneous cooperation, doing so without ecological offense or, you know, infringing on anybody's rights or to attacking anyone's sovereignty. We respect personal dominion and the dominion of a nation, you know, and we're spontaneously cooperating to build together this sense that we live in a paradigm, a world paradigm, to which everyone belongs, everyone must participate, everybody must contribute. And how we do that is up to us, ultimately, to decide how we're going to do that. But we know that the overarching purpose, the reason why we're here, is to create this ever more perfect world together. You know, it's the notion of one of the founding principles of why so many people came to America is they thought that like going to America was like going to heaven. You know, freedom, liberation, independence, self-determination, you know, to go and work hard intentionally to make something new and make something that is ideal and of quality, and to do so in such a way that seems like it is something that you would actually want. This is good, you know? And so I think, you know, Trump's incapacity to really sense what would be right for all parties involved, the fact that he's using his position as a position of power and authority without having a spine of integrity behind it, he's putting America in a very precarious position. And I think that his failure to be truly transparent with Americans about what he's doing, and that his cohort and his administration are fabricating these senses and stripping people away of their rights, breaking down systems that were supposed to be corrective, you know, like the sense of, you know, free press being broken down because of what justification is he really giving that we shouldn't have, you know, public broadcasting station anymore. Why? You know, what is reasonable about that? To me, it's like the whole concept that Jefferson said, the right corrective of, you know, infringements on the Constitution where people are not in alignment with it is education. And that holds true for everyday Americans. It holds true for anybody that is, you know, coming into America, and it holds true for anybody who's taken an oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend that Constitution. You know, and then the idea of like, what about your offering as a leader is really enticing, you know? Like, that seems fun. That seems interesting. That seems like an adventure, and I want to be a part of it, and I want to be about it. And not in a, like, you know, us versus them bullshit. You know, that's not integrity bound. That's not a good thing to do. Like, it's playing on notions of fear, and it's really, like, forcing people to make bad decisions and behave in terrible ways. But, like, this, you know, promise of a better future, something that you can involve in that is more freeing and liberating, you know, which comes into the notion of what I think that we can build together as a nation. One of the ideas that I've been kind of like working on for quite some time, but here recently has really like come, you know, fully into the space of my attention and my awareness when I look at the world, what I'm seeing reflected back to me is this sense of needing to have a new sense of our social safety nets. They're the things that are being torn and broken down, and the incoming president has to know how to take what is going to be left behind by the outgoing administration and know how to work with what you got. And if right now the current administration is breaking all these systems down, getting rid of these, you know, social safety nets and supports, you know, leaving people by the side of the road and discarding them and setting people up for failure and all of these things, like, instead of, you know, continuing to work out in that system, try to justify, you know, discarding human beings and to suffering those people, you know, pains that are unnecessary. Go into the situation and say, okay, what happened is the dismantling of those social safety nets really means it's now, you know, an opportunity to not build things, you know, set things back to the way they were. We're proceeding forward in progress, making it ever more perfect union, right? So the sense is we have an opportunity to create something that's bigger and better, something that's more reasonable, more fair, that serves more people, that, you know, we don't have to constantly argue about. Are we going to continue to, you know, have Social Security, and that's going to change, like, how people are able to tap into that resource is going to change, and, you know, because we have to, you know, change the qualification age and, you know, the requirements for work requirements for, you know, accessing, you know, social benefits or whatever. All that stuff has to change in order to, you know, make the system work in the way that, you know, the operators of the system, the government, are able to get the outcomes that they need in order for them to continue to concentrate power and determine outcomes in a way that are not necessarily about actually providing what the general promotion of the general welfare was about. You know, the fact that they're like threatening people to say, like, you're going to go work in the mines, or you're going to go work in the, you know, fields or whatever, as we kick out all these immigrants because bad hombres and we got to get rid of them or whatever. You know, trying to suggest that they're now creating this like vacuum that is suddenly all the people who they're going to force into, you know, work requirements are going to go and fill those spaces. First of all, like, work should be good and decent work, and it should be something that people actually want to do. You know, work isn't just about like slaving away for your survival, because you can't survive unless you work, which is the paradigm that they're creating and they're operating out of and they're forcing everybody into right now. You know, that's their offering to you. But rather taking it in a reasonable way of saying, like, there needs to be good and decent work for all people, and that we need to understand there are very many very hard labor and very hazardous jobs that exist that we do need people to fill until we are capable of innovating out that and automating those systems. As we need people to fulfill those roles, we need to compensate them for their hazard pay. You know, whenever I think of this, I always think of the concept of compensations for military. So, you know, the social safety net should really be similar to how the military pays out, in a sense of having like a base pay. And then when you're in hazardous situations, like in a war zone or something, you get hazard pay. and you get a basic housing allowance, and you get a basic allowance for sustenance, and you get basic TRICARE, healthcare, and you're able to have that sense that I know I'm going and I'm serving in this role that is a necessary, vital, important, integrity bound, very important role in our nation. And as such, because of that, I am getting fair and adequate compensation for that, so that I know that my family is taken care of. So that I know that I don't have to worry when I'm like deployed overseas, whether I have to worry about, my children have enough food to eat, or the means to keep a roof over their head, and these sorts of things. It's provisioned and accommodated within the contract, the social and, economic and employment contract of being in the military. And so to me, it seems like it would be more reasonable to approach our social safety nets in that way. And, excuse me, not in a sense of like, where some people try to take it with like universal basic income, where it's just like everybody gets incomes, like where are you going to draw all that money from, sort of thing. And for the sense of like appealing to the sensibilities of people who are like, they don't like the concept of there being existing a free ride. You have to appeal to the sensibilities of people that don't like to think that somebody's getting off too easy, but also appeal to the interest of people is like, we should not be making anything harder for people. And the obvious sensibilities of that there are different ability people, and because of that, you have to recognize that we must accommodate, in order to bring them into any sort of role where they would be productive contributors and participants to society. We have to support that role for them, in providing the means for them to involve. It reminds me of this great story that I read once about the early days of trying to get the ADA compliances to come into a college so that students that had wheelchairs were able to actually make it to class. And listening to the story and watching one of the videos where like people were getting themselves out of their wheelchairs and climbing up these stairs to be able to prove the point of there's no accessibility here. And so how do you expect me to have any capability to be involved in this situation and to benefit from it? You are intentionally setting me at a disadvantage and expecting me to do things that I'm not capable of. It's also like, expecting a child that is in preschool to somehow be able to solve for, something that is in a college grade. The things have to be reasonable in order for them to be justified and sensible and fair, and to be what we could consider that's the right thing. It's the right thing to do at the right time for the right reasons in the right way. And everybody needs some sense of accommodation, and that's really what our social welfare system is supposed to be about. But turning that on its head, and it's no longer about, welfare, and you're thinking about the single mom that is sponging off of the system and being lazy sort of thing, which tends to be the, phantom concept that people are like, I'm against that. Conservatives are really big about projecting that concept to people. But rather in a sense of, we should be establishing our social safety nets to provide for that concept that we promised in the tenets of our, preamble to the Constitution. Promote the general welfare. And to promote that general welfare, we need to have a sense of like, what does welfare mean? And it should be the concept of turning, again, the notion of it's a bad thing for welfare into the concept of welfaring. We want people to fare well in their lives. We want to know that we don't have to worry about the little old granny who her husband's passed away and she's just living off of his pension. and a little bit of her Social Security. And she's, having to take care of herself the best that she can. She lives in want for better things for herself, but she doesn't have the supports, the necessary supports to be able to live that way. And she's dependent on the kindness and the support and the caring of others in order to help her to get along with her life, because she can't give those things to herself, So things like Meals on Wheels come to her house, bring her a hot meal that she doesn't have to stand in the kitchen and prepare, which she may not have the physical capacity to do, or to go out shopping to get that food to prepare it for herself, or have the money and means to be able to order online to have it delivered to her door, And maybe she doesn't have the physical capacity to be able to take care of her body so well. Maybe she needs help getting in and out of the shower, Maybe she needs help getting dressed. We need to understand that people have needs like that. And it's not just the elderly. There's disabled people, perfectly capable of doing things, but there are limits to what they can do. And some of those abilities that are differing may not be so apparent. Like, they may not be in a wheelchair all of the time, or in a walker, or walking on crutches, or with a cane. But they may need that accommodation every once in a while. And it's unreasonable to expect them to go out and labor in a field, bending over backwards in the heat to work on this thing when they physically don't have the capacity to do that. Just because you want people to fill a role because it's going to create a production that's necessary doesn't mean that you're going to be able to just put anybody in that position. We have to be consciously aware of capabilities, And our well-being, our sense of our capacity to be well, to fare well, is really about understanding the orientation of our capabilities, and to have a system of supports that are in place to provide us, provision, accommodate, steward, and support our needs for the assistance and the, offerings of others, so that we can live the fullest potential of a good life together. It's very similar to a child, a child, when they first start out, can't feed themselves, can't change their own diaper, And so as a parent, or as anybody who sees a child and their incapacity to provide these things for itself that it needs, knowing that its well-being and its good life is dependent on it having food brought to it and to be given to it in a very intentional way, knowing that this is how you need it in order for you to be able to take it so that you can be nourished, because we know that that's what you need to grow. We're consciously aware because we are intelligent enough to know that's necessary, and we provide it for you. We're aware of your needs and we're aware of your wants. You cry, it's like, you need a bottle, you need a diaper change, you need to be warm, you need to be swaddled, you need to be held, you need to be comforted, you need to be rocked. There's something that you need, and our job is to figure out what it is that you need and provide it for you so that you can be well. And I don't think it's unreasonable in any capacity to say that we would not, just put it this way, at what point do we stop caring for others? At what age does our care for children stop? When you think about it, everybody is somebody's child. Everybody came from somebody, And so when you think of that, like, we all are, children in need of care and love and support. And as we become more dependent and we, say, I can do this myself, Anybody who's been a parent, which I am a parent, I love my children, they are my heart. The sense of having a child that grows up into their own determinations, like, I can do this on my own, I don't need you to tie my shoes for me. I can cut my own meat. I know how to do this. I can dress myself. Even though when they put on their shirt and it's backwards, you let them leave the house as it is. If that gives them a sense of self-determination, be all for it. Who is to say that it is our job to correct them in their own self-determination, you know? I think that a good parent, like any good leader, is to help to be a guide in a reasonable way, and to help them explore and help them to self-determine and give them good role models so they know, like, this is what's the good thing to do. This is what the right thing to do. Let them explore. Life is an exploration, you know, not a competition. And it's not about forcing your children to become what you demand of them, you know, but rather, in a way, it's disciplined, not punishment. Discipline. Like, you know where the bounds and limitations of what you can and can't do are. You know, this is what's reasonable. And as you grow and you need to change those bounds, as you grow into independence, perfectly reasonable. But of course, with the conscious, you know, conversation of like, this is where you are at your life. And now that you have that responsibility upon yourself to make these decisions for yourself, it's incumbent upon me to help you to be informed, to educate you in the ways that you need to have that voice of reason and conscience in the back of your head in the time of uncertainty, like what would be potentially the right thing to do. It reminds me of what I do with my children when there's a national tragedy that ends up happening. You know, we sit down and we discuss it and we talk about, this is what's happening right now in the world. Like in the instance of school shootings, that was a really big fear why my children were in school, like uncertain of whether or not they're going to be safe when they go to school and whether or not they would be able to come home. And knowing the only thing that I can do, not wanting them to live in a sense of fear. I don't want to live in a sense of fear. And I don't want them to be, you know, like looking shady at everybody and just like questioning whether or not they're trustworthy. Like, I don't want them to live in that state. I want to protect and preserve their innocence. And the best way to do that is to inform them and say, look, this national tragedy happened, you know, and the best that we can do is to pray for the healing of everybody involved and to hope from this that we can grow as a people in the right direction that helps to prevent this from happening. You know, recognize the shortcomings and why these sorts of things happened. But in these conversations, at every stage of their development, the conversations was always the, you know, mama bear effect, as I say. I'd come in and I'd be like, all right, guys, in this situation, I want you to have the confidence that you know what to do. It's just like what schools do in fire drills, right? And now even more so than ever, they have, you know, active shooter drills, which is unfortunate that that's where we're at, but that is where we're at. But it gives them a sense of knowing what to do in a reasonable way so they don't panic and freak out, you know? And to think that they're doing the right thing in a reactive sense, but really it's moving themselves closer to danger. You need to know like where you are in the orientation of the situation. Recognize, yeah, that really is a danger and a threat that we have to worry about. What would you do in that circumstance? You know? And so, you know, having those type of conversations with my kids prepares them for in case shit happens and I'm not there to protect them or make the decisions for them, or to guide them and lead them, you know, to safety. They have to have a sense of what's safe for themselves. They have a reasonableness of self-determination, self-autonomy, you know? And that is the same sense of like, as your children grow, you're informing them of the world that they are entering into, the paradigm they're existing into. And as new situations arise, informing of the situation so that we can make the right decisions together and independently. And so, you know, I think of it as like my children would be little heroes in every situation, because their knowledge and their wisdom and their sense of this, you know, mom's voice kicks in that moment is like, this is what you do when that happens. That reasonableness kicks in and it gives them a sense of determination. I know what to do. And they come in and then they help those people who don't know what to do in that situation. And they could be a solid confidence for people to, like, okay, all right, they seem to know what they're doing, we're going to follow along with that. Not in a sense of like, following blindly, but that person is there to help you and to protect you. It kind of reminds me, which is, an interesting, weird analogy, I guess, to bring into, but the movie, I believe it's called San Andreas Fault, where the concept is the dad is, spoiler alert, the dad is, versed in being, a first responder, and then helps to make sure his child is knowledgeable about what to do in these disaster case scenarios. And that reasonableness helped his daughter to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, for the right reason, in a calm and coherent manner, because they knew, how to orient themselves in a challenging, variable situation. At least these are reasonable things that you can do when that happens. And then it helped them to be able to be a hero for those who didn't know what to do in that situation. But the concept is we need to be there for everybody in their stage of development, help to prepare them, and to help in the ways that they maybe can't do something for themselves, help them to be supported in that role, but also help them to be supportive for others who maybe don't have the capacities within themselves. And in that way, we're fostering a development and relationship with one another so that we can be in service to one another, And so instead of like always depending on the idea of, who's supposed to represent, safety in a situation, like police officers, I think that, police officers need to have the right type of orientation in order to get back in alignment with the original spirit of intent of serving and protecting, and to be, contributing and participating members of society in a sense of giving us a reasonable sense that we're all safe. And they're just there as a check and balance to make sure that, you have someone to rely on, a reliable source of safety and security and protection. But in the sense of like, maybe they're not always available. I know there's plenty of areas, especially like rural areas, that their finances of their incomes of tax revenues in that location are not so much that they can afford to be able to pay for the necessary compensations for supplies and gear and training and wages for sheriffs and police officers in order to preserve, protect their communities. Especially as communities grow, there may be a point where they grow fast, but there's not enough, revenues that are being drawn in order to grow those, protect and serving forces, first responders and things like that. And so that's where it's really important, right, that we all are capable individuals to be able to care for ourselves in case, others are not able to be there for us. And that's where community and neighborhoods are really important in cultivating and fostering, in a sense of like, we're kind of like a family together. We have to rely and depend on one another, look out for one another's best interests, And I think that if we work in the mentality of like welfaring stewardship of our homes and of our neighborhoods and of our communities and of our cities or rural towns and of our states and of our nation and of our corner of the world and our place of belonging in the greater scheme of the world, if we're stewarding that in a sense of like, we have to provide provision, accommodate, steward, support in a trustworthy, coherent way where we all are willing to, obligate ourselves to that sense of domestic and civil order, and to inform and to support as is necessary, that's the only way we're really going to be able to work out the sense of like an ever more perfect union. And so if we have a system of sensibility about welfaring, stewarding our welfaring, to help to care for everybody as if, we're all just one big family, and we have fidelity to our family, we are loyal to our family, and to know that we all have to just get along somehow. We all have our place of, contribution and participation, and that everybody would participate and contribute if in doing so was aligned with their capabilities as a person, and provisioned with the right accommodations if necessary so that they can do what they would be good at. And that for what they do is actually reasonable, leads us in a direction where we would want to go. And for the whole point of the exercise to be about making sure everybody lives the good life, and understanding the more dangerous work and the more hazardous work, it's incumbent upon us to handle those positions with greater care and respect for what they represent and what they require, and what it will mean at the cost of that individual's capacity to live out in certain ways. There's going to be limits to stuff. And so I think it's just a matter of caring enough about ourselves and each other, and to making sure that we have a sense of we're all trying to live the good life together. What does that mean to you? And how may I be in service to help you to achieve that? In a way where I don't have to worry about you. I know that you're living the good life, and that that there's help out there, and all you have to do is ask, and it will come, and we will do what is necessary to give you that support, And so in reimagining and aligning ourselves with that integrity-bound commitment to provisioning, accommodating, stewarding, supporting everyone's capacity to live the good life, and the reasonableness, making sure it's just, fair, reasonable, and right. In the way that we approach that, I think that the sense of promoting the general welfare in the welfaring stewardship, we should be doing something kind of like social safety nets being approached more like an employee compensation package, right? And that in that package, it provides things that give us, old age security. So our retirement, capacities, where we don't have to be, in 100%, contribution and participation to the productivity of society, that we can, take a respite from that, not in a sense of like you're not allowed to work anymore, but just like we understand that as you get older, your capacities to do certain things are going to decline, and we need to provision, accommodate, and steward for that. And then the concept of healthcare, like we must fare well, we must be in a state of good health and well-being in order to have capabilities. If our health declines, our capacity to do things declines. If we have a decline in health, our productivity declines. You cannot expect somebody who is hurt or injured to perform at the same optimal capacity as a person who is in a state of well-being. And then also in the sense of like people knowing that you care enough about their health, good health and well-being, there's a sense in their head that you care, and that gives them more adherence to the fidelity, more adherence to the faithfulness of what we're working on together. Like I'm willing to contribute, participate how I can, the best that I can, in all the ways that I can, because it means so much to me that we have this sort of offering in society. And I know that it's not just for any, small group of cohorted people that are in insulated pockets of thriving. This is about all of us. We're all in this together, and we all mutually benefit. That gives people a sense of I'm in it too. It's the same spirit that, people had when they came to the Americas, and the same sense and spirit that people had, and when they determined we're going to declare independence and found our nation. It's that we're in it together sort of thing. We mutually pledge, right? And when you do that, you're willing to do whatever it takes, and you bring forth your best, so that with confidence, that you are a part of a living legacy of the accomplishment of that ever more perfect union, And so there's going to be times when your health declines for whatever reason, and you need to have adequate health care in order to address that so you can get back into optimization. And there are going to be some things that may, over time, limit your capacities. And when your capacities are limited, you should be supplemented with supports to enhance your capabilities to whatever degree they can be in a reasonable manner, so that you can continue to live the good life and continue to participate and feel that you're, a part of this too. And then, the sense of like, we need childcare, and we need elderly care. And not just in a sense of like, we need somebody to watch our kids while we go work to be productive, or we need somebody to watch our parents who are ailing and sick, and elderly or whatever, while we go out and be productive. Yeah, that's true. But more in a sense of like, we need to be in it together for the intentional development of children. And we are cooperatively a part of the process of child development, which also means that we have to raise children together. The concept of it takes a community to raise a child. And so it should be about also knowing that, caregivers who provide for children, whether it's a parent staying home or it's a babysitter coming and watching the kids while you go out on a date with your husband, or a sense of having, somebody that is there to help to teach your children things that you maybe don't have the capacity to teach them, like what they experience at school. These sorts of things are really about molding and shaping the next generation. It's all of our responsibility. And so we should have a system of mutual supports promoting the general welfare is to care for our children and to want to care for their well-being, and the same thing with our elderly. There are many people that reach a point where they are just not able to provide for themselves, and they do need to have supports. And we have all of the capabilities to do it. And we have so many beautiful, blessed, wonderful hearts in the world that open up to want to help to care for the elderly in an honorable, respectful, dignified way, that help them to gracefully age and to come to the end of their lives with a sense of knowing the world, is a good place. I'm proud of the world that I left behind, because we have such a world that people are willing to be there to care for us in our moments of leaving. And, it's also to honor the life that people have lived to make this world what it is. We have to be there through the entire life of an individual and to constantly advance forward the blessings of a good life. And it's not unreasonable to want that as our outcome that we are engineering for, And then the sense of like having sick leave and grievance leave and, family leave, for whatever that orientation may be. And, for having a new child, having leave for that. It's okay. We can pick up the slack when somebody has to take a little bit of time off, and it's not unreasonable to say like we should really have these types of times, because those times are like a respite so that they can have a revival, so that they can come back optimally. We're not always 100%. We have ups and downs constantly. We're humans. It's a part of the human experience. So that's, some of us need to step in and fulfill a role a little bit more when somebody's down and out, and it's not unreasonable to do that. We can all pitch in. And so having that knowing in the back of your mind that you don't have to worry about, losing your entire stability of your life if you don't go to work today, because you had the flu and you're just like not going to be able to be 100% what you need to be in order to perform that day. you know? And then you go to work and then you end up getting other people sick, and then guess what? You're costing the productivity of everyone, you know? And then you don't know what sort of like dangerous situation you're bringing into people, like when we had COVID. You know, you don't know whether that person has COVID and then they're going to, you know, go to work and then give that COVID to somebody else that's going to go home, and they have an elderly parent that ends up dying because they're exposed to COVID and they don't have the physical, you know, antibody response to be able to protect their body and to live through that, you know, immune attack. Or for young children, these sorts of things. And so the desperation and the situation we be in, that we would be in a desperate situation of like, you know, the potential for sickness to spread to other people because they have the sense they need to go to work to be able to survive and live, and that they don't have the offering of being able to just stay home until you're well. You know, we're putting ourselves at risk for no reason. You know, it's unreasonable, I will say. And so we should have that type of like leave, and then we should have things like gap insurance. You know, we should have health insurance and medical insurance, but gap insurance as well, which is like, you know, in the case where it's, you know, a little bit more than just a couple days sick, maybe something, you had an accident and, you know, you're incapacitated because you harmed yourself or something. There needs to be something that can step in to fulfill the role of provisioning and accommodating and stewarding to make sure that you're still living the good life even in your downtime. And then the concept of having transitioning ourselves to live a more malleable, adaptable, mobile, efficient, sufficient, sustainable lifestyle that adheres to our concept of stewardship. So that means, you know, coming in into upgrading our systems, especially in particular our residential areas, because, you know, safe home space is core to the health and well-being of people. It's our sanctuary, and it therefore upholds the sanctity of our sense of living the good life and our sense of being well-faring. And then having, you know, the reasonable accommodation of that. So our systems are upgraded so we have a safe and sound, reliable, robust, ample, you know, housing stock, and that our houses aren't falling into disarray. They're being well maintained. You know, same thing with our roads and our bridges and you know, massive infrastructure that everybody's dependent on, you know, subway and bus transit systems, these sorts of things. All of these things need to be accommodated and provided, and they need to be upgraded and they need to be maintained so that they operate most optimally to achieve the outcome engineering goal of welfaring stewardship, you know. And welfaring stewardship is always adhering to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which are authored by the United Nations. I talk about this a lot because it is core to the concept of welfaring, you know, and then the concept of aligning within planetary boundaries. We know, you know, what is the safe operating space of planet Earth, and we align ourselves into that by innovating out the problems that we face that keep us from being able to live within the reasonable means of comfortable conservation that helps us to stay within those parameters while achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and provisioning, accommodating, and stewarding so everybody lives the good life, you know. And then other things in terms of like giving people a sense of capital and resource and agency, making sure that people have a sense that, you know, they are a part of the governing process. They're self-determined, they're self-governed, but they also, as independent individuals, come together to be able to make informed decisions about how we choose together to be governed. And that will require what I believe in America needs now more than ever is a fourth branch of government, which is the establishment of a civics branch of government. It gives everybody a seat at the table, a voice to be heard, all relevant stakeholders are there, and understanding that everybody has rights and responsibilities that must be respected, valued, appreciated, and understanding we have to look to what is the sound science, what we're capable of doing, what we must build out for, what sort of accommodations are necessary, what sort of innovations can help us innovate out the problems that we might face, and then making sure that we are adhering to, the sociological paradigm, how we are living with one another, and making sure we're respecting our common humanity, our sense of the humanities, and for everything not to be, circled and coalesced and built and established around the concept of money, but rather of making a difference in the ways that we have deemed as a collective are to our well-being and benefit, most likely to produce our happiness. And so, I think if we take our social supports in a sense of like an employee compensation package to make sure that everybody has what they need, this will take care of a big chunk of what the responsibility is for independent employers to provide. If a large company or even a small company no longer has to worry about providing that for people in order to entice them to work there, that's just a natural given. Everybody has that. Then they know that they can have the next level of offerings to people, which is like, we have this to provide to you, or we have this to entice you with. But that they have that baseline standard, support system that is a universal basic innovation of well-faring so that people live the good life. And of course, instead of companies having to do that individually in their own individual independent ways, which is very much dependent on the bottom line of those companies and their capacity for success, which means that those numbers can shrink. And the best way for it to shrink is to get rid of, employees because they don't have enough money to continue to compensate them as they had promised. Instead, this shifts it to everybody funds the system that everybody benefits from. And, corporations pay their part too into it because they are drawing from the pool of capable people to work their companies. And so it's a resource, this abundant resource is human ingenuity and human capability that we are empowering as our pool of capable people for them to benefit from, to draw in as employees, and then people don't have to worry about if for some reason a company has to downsize, that they're not going to lose these basic provisions and accommodations of ensuring they live the good life. And so that fear and uncertainty of like whether or not you have your job today or tomorrow based off of the whims and the flows and the ebbs and the crashes of markets, it's instead, this is secured. And that every business is not dependent on any one individual business, it's not dependent on any one individual class or income bracket. It's everybody pays into what I like to call the stewardship tax, which is essentially saying this is what we have to pay into the system to make sure it all works for everyone. And if our system is not based off of, Social Security you've paid into your whole life, and so this is a right and you should get it and be able to draw from it so that you can live a good life, or live and survive. As inflation happens and everything, the spending power of that money that you have accumulated and pooled over time for your work becomes less powerful. And so that system can't be sustainable in that regard, especially because it's like we have to continuously pull money into that system to pay, into people, for people to have that. But, there's nothing on the back end to ensure that there's going to be a continuous influx of money going into that, especially as we get more into automation, right? So if we're creating a stewardship tax that everybody pays for, which is kind of like a membership fee, right? Everybody pays into it, everybody benefits from it. Kind of like the Costco effect, which I love Costco. It's a great company, great concept. But something similar to that is like we all pay in and we all benefit, right? And, corporations pay into it because they know what they're getting out of it is happy, productive, capable people that aren't worried about, the changing tides of the market or whatever, and they come and bring their best because they're secure in their way of life. They are living the good life. And now they're just taking risks for higher things, man. They're all about showing up every day and bringing their best and doing their best to advance us in some amazing, exotic, wonderful direction, or necessary, productivity that we have to do just to maintain things and keep it going, We have to respect every role in society. It's all vitally important, And it's good and it's decent work. Everybody's important, And this removes around the concept of trickle economics, and it removes the competitive notions of dog eat dog, mighty crush the weak, free for all hellscape that we're being forced and conformed to, and shrinking our world of options and opportunities, because we have people that are in the current administration that are all about, helping the deviant echelon of society become more rich, without giving a damn about all of the people that are being left by the side of the road, whole populations of people, And so it alleviates that. And it just says, no, we do this baseline standard, criterion echelon of society, everybody lives the good life. And we're all working towards that together. And so when markets have shifts or whatever, the system is stable. It is still enduring, And one company may fail, but another one is there to pick up the pace, in whatever new frontier that we're advancing into. And the more that we bring in automation, and we bring it as a stewardship for all companies to have to pay into the stewardship still, this actually gives us a reasonable, intelligible, vital, viable, way for us to transition into a more autonomy. Because those companies, while they may, like Amazon, for instance, more and more autonomy, more and more robots doing work, less and less employees that they buy. So they don't have to pay out into, wages for people and, employee compensation packages and whatnot. And then worrying about working a bottom line of how do we keep enough of a force of work to get the productivity necessary done every month in order for us to keep the lights on and, keep paying people exorbitant amounts of money at the executive level. Looking beyond that, but they have to do something to stay open. And if we made them have to pay a common basic stewardship tax, it doesn't matter how much autonomy they go into, they're still paying into the same system that makes sure that nobody gets left behind, and it's reasonable to want to do that, especially if it's a reasonable baseline standard that we make everybody pay into the stewardship tax, so those companies can have an assurance that we know this is how much we have to pay into it, and then we don't have to worry about cutting our bottom line by cutting people out of the scenario. But then we know that we don't have to worry about society disintegrating, or there being some destruction of social order and domestic order declines, and then there's chaos and mayhem because it's dog eat dog, mighty crush the weak, free for all hellscape, and it's one side pitted against the other, and it innovates out that problem, and then it provides for one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about and considering during the times of COVID. It's it would have really been to our benefit at that time period, instead of charging to the future, by paying everybody this compensation of, I don't even remember what it was called, but it was paycheck to everybody for, to get you through in this difficult time because we're, as government, forcing shutdown of everything. This blank check that essentially the government wrote to itself to be able to give handouts to people to keep them from rioting and raising up against the government in this time of the government forcing them to, shut everything down because it did not know how to deal with this invisible, unknown threat and these, variable they were very much not prepared to deal with, which is very much Trump's fault why it got so freaking out of hand. There was a reasonable plan in place to address something that may have been a potential pandemic scenario, like I was saying with my children, in a scenario universe, there may be, you never know, a potential school shooting. This is what you should probably do. This is what should kick in as your game plan to get things done if shit hits the fan in that way. there was a plan, a reasonable plan, maybe not the most perfect plan, but a reasonable plan that was in place by the Obama administration that they left behind. And Trump being, I know the answer to everything, I know what needs to get done, just threw it out the window because he didn't want to have anything to do with what Obama did. Wasn't even willing to see the good in what he did and how that might have benefited. Threw it out the window and then left so many people unprepared, ill-prepared, you know. And then he tried to blame it on Obama, when in reality it was just his lack of forethought, his lack of foresight, his lack of consideration of like, we must be prepared in a scenario universe because, you know, the weight of the nation is on my shoulders and I have to be able to make the right decisions from an informed place and to know what we have in capacities to get things done and how to deploy and execute and, you know, be prepared with a plan of, you know, in case shit happens sort of thing. He wasn't willing, because of his pride, to accept that anybody else's plan, because they're a Democrat, they don't know what they're doing, you know, wasn't going to be a good thing. And because of that, and his fact that he rejected, he denied, and he refused to accept the truth of things as they are, and be intelligently responsive to this unknown variable that has now entered our space of, you know, considerations. We're in the situation. We find ourselves in a precarious position. What do? He wasn't willing to think reasonably to make the right decisions, and people lost their lives unnecessarily due to his incapacity to be humble enough to just discover that he may not have the capacity himself to do the right thing, lean on the foresight of people who were like, this is a potential, we should probably prepare for it, you know. But it's kind of the same thing in terms of how we need to plan out the scenario universe for in case shit hits the fan again, right, guys? It's not just a sense of like pandemics are still a likelihood. It is a potential too in the realm of possibility, especially, you know, as we are in a conflicting universe. There is, you know, reasonableness that somebody may want to try to come after us in that, you know, weakness because they saw what happened with COVID. You know, they could weaponize that sense of attacking that vulnerability. We have to be prepared with a reasonableness of how we would respond. And so one of the things that I thought of quite frequently during the times of COVID, because, you know, my mind, when shit hits the fan, it's like, problem solved. What do we do? What's the next thing that needs to be done? You know, what could we potentially do that might be able to be a reasonable way to approach this, you know, that can be good for everybody in the terms of like just getting us through this moment, you know, of desperation, of crisis, these sorts of things. And so one of my thoughts was the concept of digital currencies. I thought that it would be reasonable for us to have an auxiliary economy that kicks in during times of crisis, whether it be, you know, conflict, or it be pandemic, or it be, you know, a recession or a depression, or, you know, some shutdown of, you know, the stock market or something like that. In times of great, you know, disturbance of our sensibilities and what we're used to doing, there should be an auxiliary system that kicks in, that runs the system in terms of like, we can still keep afloat, we can still pay our bills, we can still keep things operational, you know, we can still have dependable sources from which we can benefit from. It's kind of similar to the concept of having like an emergency credit card, you know, like I know that I can spend on this line of credit to keep the lights on and everything while I get through this precarious situation. It's kind of like gap insurance. When you get injured at work and you need to still pay your bills, insurance comes in and it covers that like extra bit to make sure you can still have everything you need to live the good life. And that when the crisis is resolved in a reasonable way, then we start paying back that system. And it's kind of like a rainy day fund, you know? And there's opportunity for people to make money off of that. You know, we need to have the appropriate corrective mechanisms to protect people from exploiting that system, much like they do with the military-industrial complex. They promote and they encourage and they justify and they provoke war, because where else do they get their money stream from? But so to make sure that we don't get in that type of scenario again, and hopefully, and there is reasonable means to break down the power structures of the military-industrial complex to make it less about war fighting readiness, but rather about keeping the peace. It has to be about keeping the peace, and that's what it should always be about. We only go to war to secure peace, and we have to have that readiness so that we can secure peace whenever we are called. But it's the same thing with like this auxiliary system. We don't want to incentivize people to do the wrong thing so that they can get an influx of money for themselves in that way. It's very similar to the concept of the rats in New York, right? There was a time when the infestation of rats in New York were so bad that the local officials were like, we have a way figured out how to solve for this problem, right? We are just going to start paying people small quantities of money for every rat tail they collect. And so, of course, human ingenuity, if there is a will, there's a way. Brilliant ingenuity put to work by bad actors with nefarious intent exploited that system and bred rats so that they could just have a constant ATM they can draw from, from the government. And the government, like, eventually caught on, like, wait a second, you're not really solving the problem that we were trying to solve for. You're creating more of a problem, so you could just suck value out of the system, extract from the system, exploiting it. And so, the government then stopped that. And then guess what? All of the breeders of those rats did, and they realized they weren't going to make money off it anymore. They just let the rats go. And then the infestation got worse. And it's just it's like, you got to kind of think that your solution is bound to have these inherent, points of potential exploitation, and you need to create corrective mechanisms. So if that happens, you can pivot out of that and reinforce a reintegration and restoration of integrities. And so when we think about it, like, the potential that I saw in these digital currencies coming in our time of need to provide this auxiliary economic system for us to, keep the lights on, make sure that we can pay our bills on time, make sure that we have the flow of money so that we can keep, bringing in our necessary resources, life vital resources, making sure people had food and water and things like that, and then making sure people had the means to pay for their cost of living during that time period, and then making sure we have the capacity for making sure that nobody is going to have to get the shit end of the stick, right? Landlords really were put in a definitely troublesome position. It's like, we needed to make sure nobody got kicked out onto the streets and didn't have a place to live, especially during a time when we're trying to tell people they have to be confined to where they live. And can't be out in public and these sorts of things. We needed to retain homes for people, but then we didn't have the means for those people to work to make the income or draw an income by which they could pay for their housing. And so these landlords were stuck in a situation where they couldn't kick these people out, though they weren't getting the income. And so it was the next level up in society, the people who were providing the means for that support system, that provisioning that life vital resource, were getting the shit end of the stick. And that put a really bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, obviously, and so the fact that the government just put it on these people, and then it was kind of just like shuffle around the responsibilities and shuffle around the outcomes, and not enough accountability in terms of like how much money is going where for what people in what ways. There were, professional artists that were drawing these large incomes, from the government's payout system or whatever. But it was like so much money going to them, and understandable, they have higher costs of living, and because they created this lifestyle for themselves where they're used to having so much money come in that's much larger. But it was a tremendous amount towards those sorts of people, and not enough for other people in other ways. Personally, not even drawing on that, I understand, like, I went without because of the fact that it was like, it didn't seem right to me. It didn't seem like the right thing to do, to just do handouts to people in this regard in a way that was just really haphazard and not together. And so in that, I, again, saw potential in relying on digital currencies as a means to switch over to an auxiliary economy in our times of need, so that we can depend on that system reliably and then pay back the system over time once we've gotten back into where we need to be. And in that sense, it could have also made it so that the people themselves who drew on it could pay back in a reasonable way that's not going to, indebt them in the future, but make sure that we refill the coffers, sort of thing. And that's where the potential for, those who hold the, digital currencies or whatever are able to, benefit from their holdings. It's very much similar to the concept of like insurance companies, But again, those systems are inherently built in with points of exploitation and not enough corrective mechanisms, so there would have to be one, because I definitely see people are already doing it with the Trump administration saying, oh, we want to do, cryptocurrency is going to be this great thing, and we're all in on it, and, to the point where the administration, the president and his family have their own versions of cryptocurrencies. It's like, what a corruption. I mean, I could get into that and spend so much time talking about how they're exploiting their positions of power and how egregiously, disgustingly inappropriate it is that they're doing it, just blatant corruption, And so to me, it's like reasonable that, you give up your entire life to become president. So it's reasonable to, you should have a capacity to still be able to build and to create and build your empire and all of these things. I get that. But there should be checks and balances with that. And so we need to have an appropriate discussion as to what is reasonable to do that. It always reminds me of Jimmy Carter, gave up his peanut farm, so that he could become president. It's like nowadays we don't even question the fact that Trump is hawking merchandise from the Oval Office, Not appropriate, but there has to be, a working of the system to understand that we can't expect somebody to give up their entire life and their capacity to develop, an entrepreneurial spirit and capacity just because, you go into the Oval Office, but you should never be able to directly benefit and profit from that position and role. And that, unfortunately, is very much what Trump is doing. And so are the people that are in his cohort, and they are, gaming the systems into their personal favor. The people who are trying, the crypto czar or whatever, is literally behind the scenes moving systems so that it's skewing things to favor him and his cohorts. And that is corruption. If those sorts of things are happening, if crypto is going to be a part of our, new reality because it's a new innovation and it has potential to, in the auxiliary way during crisis to do a good thing, as I've seen it to have potential to do, it needs to have a corrective mechanism, and it very much needs to be transparent. And it needs to not be, burdening the taxpayers to have to, bail out these crypto people, It was one of the greatest mistakes of Obama's presidency when he made the American people bail out the banks and left them with no repercussions and no real true corrective mechanisms. It actually made the entire system of banking more exposed to exploitations. And, maybe because that wasn't like his expertise to deal with that, but that's when you should be taking the larger, bigger picture perspective of like, you may not be the most skilled person and knowledgeable person about that, but you have more than enough resources at your hand to know, to figure out, to find out, and to work with people for a reasonable way that makes sure that we're not saddling the American people with this like untenable situation in terms of our economy in order to, pay out large, paydays for, bankers, which is what ended up happening. And so I very much see that same type of corruption happening with cryptocurrencies being embedded into our system. It's very much the same thing with artificial intelligence being embedded in our government systems. These are skewed to favor a very few people with not just money, but also the means to make decisions where the American people did not vote for those people to be decision makers on their behalf. And especially when you have systems which, I can't go without saying, the integration of Elon Musk's artificial intelligence companies' offerings into the government systems, I think is a very tragic mistake that needs to be corrected for. Especially because in the recent unfolding of events, right prior to this big announcement of like, oh, we're integrating this into the government system, we're integrating into the military, that this artificial intelligence that is very much modeled off of its creator and its, founder of Musk, started spewing out anti-Semitic remarks, saying terrible things, attacking, innocent individual people, and suggesting to people that, we needed to, like, have another Holocaust, essentially, and encouraging that. And I don't care how much of an update in a repair of a system that may have been able to fastly be patchworked, and sent back out, deleted all those tweets, whatever, and then all of a sudden evidence that it happened isn't there except for in the memory of all the reporters that were able to capture the truth of that moment. That should have been a point in time where we said we're halting our considerations of this until we get full transparency to the public, that they know this is what we were considering doing, and now, in light of recent events, we have to seriously consider whether that's something we should do or not, and then let the people themselves have a voice of reason to step in to say whether or not they would even want the government to be led by something that can so easily be skewed out of favor, and the fact that Grok checks in with Musk's considerations, naturally, that is how it's programmed, is to check to see, what does my master say, so that it can model it after his decision making, and then you're embedding that into the government. And I don't believe that Elon Musk has the best interests of America at heart. I don't think that he has the best interest of humanity at heart. I honestly don't think he has his own best interest at heart. And so we are making a grave mistake by misplacing our trust in him and his systems. And I think that if we were to integrate artificial intelligence into our government, it should be only through the means of an artificially intelligent system that is democratized. And it should be a system built off of the total incorporation of all relevant stakeholders, and that all people should have a voice. That intelligent system should be modeled off of being able to give substantiation to the functionings of outcomes of the civics branch of government. The people themselves participating, contributing, involving with, helping to train the large language models of this system that would bring to life their voice. And you're not going to get that with a system that is innate to its core, from its outset, its point of origin, its source material comes directly from the unified proposition, and perception of Elon Musk. And you look at his erratic behavior over the years and how he has gone increasingly radical. I don't think that any person would be reasonable to entrust your life to this man. It very much reminds me of a quote that I consider often as the strength and the integrity of something really doesn't matter to you. If its use is for something that's, functional and it does a thing, sure. But when your very life depends on the strength and the integrity of it, you really care whether or not it's trustworthy. And Musk has not presented himself as a trustworthy person. And I don't think that we're ever going to find a reasonable foundation by which we can build trust on anything that he has as an offering, because the attitude and direction of his heart does not present itself as being working for the best interest of all parties involved, to always looking for the best outcome of others. He is very much the pinnacle model of the deviant echelon of society. And it's not to say he does not have redeeming qualities, and it's not to say that he's an overall horribly god-awful bad person that doesn't have, a sense of any moral orientation. But it is saying that I don't think, if left to his own devices, that he would do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons in the interests of all parties involved. He's proven himself consistently to be so selfish and so self-centered that he is willing to burn every bridge. He's willing to destroy all levels of integrity. He's willing to, tell fuck you to go fuck yourselves to people, and attack people and weaponize the justice system against people he perceives as enemies. Very much like what Trump does is probably why they got along so well. He's willing to punish people intentionally, to harm people intentionally, and have no sense of maybe I ought not to do that because that probably isn't the right thing. And his systems are built off of his sense of values, his sense of virtues. And it may be wonderful to want to do these things and advance technology and help to advance civilization in these fun and extraordinary and wonderful ways, yes. But how you do anything is how you do everything. And Musk has proven himself that how he is willing to do things is a complete disregard for the sanctity of life. He can't even honor and respect the, autonomy of his own children. He's perfectly fine with parental alienation. He thinks that children are objects, that life partners are objects, possessions, things to be acquired and discarded as it suits his wants and needs. The types of friends and the people that he surrounds himself around, even if some of them have levels of integrity, he doesn't necessarily listen to them because he knows what's best. And he's all about doing what matters to him the most without conscious consideration or concern about who he's harming. And yeah, he can be, this shining light, and he can be funny, and he can be entertaining, and he can, really captivate an audience, and he can break down ideas and concepts and thinking about it in an intelligent way, and he cares to know things and consider how things might be done in new and interesting ways. These are all positive qualities about him. I'm not saying he's an irredeemable person. I'm saying his sense of his place of belonging in the world and how he orients himself to other people is very much about bullying. It's very much about harming other people, not caring about consequences. He's not considerate. He's not compassionate. He literally said, the fundamental, thing that's going to stand in the way of humanity is empathy. It's like the weakness of civilization is empathy. And then he later, retracts and says, maybe I lacked empathy for being up there with the chainsaw, so I'm going to cut all these systems, only for later for it to come to the realization to everybody that, what he was essentially saying, he's perfectly fine with allowing people to die because we took away the supports that were there and built no auxiliary system to wean them off that system or to build out new intelligence systems that do a better job of supporting them, and he didn't care about the soft power that represented, the stability that it provided for society. And now how much violence is going to perpetuate and how much innocence is going to be violated and done violence to because those systems are no longer there. Because he doesn't care. And so it's wrong to trust him and his artificial intelligence systems to be embedded in the government and to be allowed to be a part of the decision-making process for how we're going to go about in our national defense. Especially because his loyalties, where do his loyalties lie? He is deeply dependent upon, the Chinese government. He's integrated for years with the Russian government. He's buddy-buddy with so many of them. Talks pally-pal, friend around, just like Trump does with the Russian government. And it's not to say, again, that we shouldn't have, open channels of communication and we shouldn't be like, you're the bad guys, enemies or whatever to anybody, because we're supposed to be creating a peaceful world. We need to have collaboration and conversation and debates and dialogues. We're not in competition with anybody. We just have to be able to prove out that we surpass their systems, because we do it right, in terms of adhering to integrities and these sorts of things. But at the same time, not to the point where you can't tell whether or not you're actually motivated by the interests of the nation that you claim to, be a citizen of, and you claim that you love America, right? So much that you want to be a part of the government and all of these things, and it's like, but what part of America do you love? The part that makes it so that you can be self-enriched and self-empowered, and all your friends and your cohort get more ancillary protections for yourselves, and you become more strong in your pockets of thriving that extract from everybody else? Or is it, do you love the America that was the possibilities of opportunity that you saw in your journey of your life to be able to go from, South Africa and the life that was there to take this journey to becoming an American citizen, and that possibility and the opportunity, everything that America afforded you and potentials for you to benefit from and take advantage of so that you can become the man that you are today. Like, is it about affording and extending that to everybody else? Is that the America that you are representing and that you believe in? Is one that makes that possibility for everybody? Or is it one that says that now I'm in a position of power, we're going to cut off, nobody else should be getting, subsidies from the government, it should only be going to these certain people and these certain powers, and literally choking and stifling innovation, to limiting the capacities of people, to burdening people unnecessarily due to the fact that you have no respects for the needs or the wants or the desires or the hopes or the dreams or the potentials of anybody else but yourself. You're a selfish person. And I don't think that America should be trusting systems that are being developed by somebody who has no coherent, firm foundation in reality. He lives in this fantasy realm of he's the center of the universe and everybody else is an NPC, And he has friends that are in his orbit that are that way too. And the few that are able to be caught up in that system for I don't know how or why they are a part of it, that have integrity, you have to recognize that those people are not the moderating influence in Elon Musk's life. He doesn't even have the right moderating influence of a good woman there to temper him down, tame him. With a sense of like family and the collegial aspects of that and the integrity of the family unit. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have lots of children. I love children. Children are wonderful, but it's when you don't have an honor and respect of the family unit that, what it seems more like is, you have the idea of wanting to just like propagate little mini versions of yourself and spread it as much as you can in the world, so you have this sense of that you're gonna live on forever through, your offspring. It's not about like nurturing and loving and respecting your children, because there's plenty of his children that he doesn't even acknowledge, So to me, it's just like, what does he care about? Where are his values? What are his soul print alignments? And over the years, I thought I knew that's what it was and what it represented, but it doesn't. It doesn't represent any of that in the long term. It doesn't represent anything that we would want to align with, And so I think that when we have people like Musk and we have people like Trump that are trying to drag America in a certain direction, you have to look at the attitude and direction of their heart to know whether or not they're taking us anywhere we would actually want to go. I don't think they have reasonable plans. They haven't advanced anything forward that inspires anyone, with a real sense of like, they really get it. They know what's up. They know what this is about. It's drama and craze and, pushing people and forcing people and limiting people and conflicting with people and fighting over here and, backstabbing, two-timing, double-crossing, pushing people under the bus. Like, that's what they're about. And so, to me, it's not reasonable to trust those type of people. I think the people that we should entrust our decision-making to, especially in the sense of like a system, people who create systems that we rely upon and we depend upon for our lives, the sanctity of our lives and the integrity of our potentials and the offerings for potentials in the future, should be based off of people that really do have the best interest of all parties involved, that really are not about, taking everything that isn't potential and skewing it into their own personal favor, that recognize the humanity in others, respect it, are grateful for it, you have a sense of agape love for all people naturally. That's what you're naturally in tune to the point where you're willing to listen to everybody's worldview and perspective and to consider it, and to have the capacity to consider an idea and not necessarily have to take it up and be all for it, and to have a sense of self-control, to know what really is what you're working towards and what's in your best interest that does not harm other people, and to care enough to rectify situations, correct mistakes, and to pursue life in a way that's carefree and loving and open to the possibilities, and to approach it like it's an adventure, in an enlightening exploration and a discovery of what's new, and a establishing a realm of potentialitudes from which we can create benefits, create the magic in the world that everybody so deeply appreciates, to have a good heart and to want to be a good person and to just honestly be a part of good humanity and to align your interests with good humanity and to not have to be told what to do, what to think, what to feel, but be receptive to the fact of being humble about your knowing, Like, I know a lot. I'm intelligent, I'm smart. I've done these things, I've learned these things over time. My experience has been broad and wide and varied and wonderful, and I'm receptive and I want to learn and all these things. But I also know that I don't know everything. And to embrace the intelligence of others so that you can learn from them and their experiences, because as I see it, it's very much like we're standing on a sphere, good old planet Earth, and we're all looking up and we have a view that is very limited. We only have a slice of the pie of the sky that we can each see individually. And so our, limited reality can only be broadened by and through engaging and interacting with other people and experiencing the world and being open to that, And that may be through like reading books or talking with people or going out and experiencing and doing work and things like that, so you have the like understanding of what it takes to be in that position, in that role, and fulfill it. Traveling the world and going places and considering different ways of life and different ways of being, and just to understand that your limited worldview is not the whole and total complete picture, and that you would never expect everybody to see what you see, but to want to inform others of how you view the world and be receptive to how other people view the world, because that's empathy, and it is a superpower. And then empathy combined with the desire to act is the sympathetic relationship of compassion. And that's the type of people that we should be entrusting our decision making on. Those are the type of people that that are going to recognize when they've made a mistake and be willing to do what it takes to correct it. They're the type of people that that even if something was modeled off of their perspective of the world, that it would be just, it would be fair, it would be reasonable, it would be right, but it would also be beautiful. It would be enlightening, and it would be something that would be endearing, and that would be like this invisible force of goodness leading people towards goodness, not some external force of bullying people into compliance. They would inspire spontaneous cooperation. I want to be a part of your world. I want to be a part of your experience. I want to champion for you and your excellence because I can see the potential in you. Those are the type of people we should be entrusting in leadership roles, especially. I think that a great leader is somebody that can not just like lead from the front, because you have to be aware of all the obstacles that we face ahead of us and to have an idea of where we're going, but also have to be able to lead from the back in a sense of like, I see where everybody is from my point of view, looking forward towards where we're going and where we're achieving. So I know what it's going to take to get everybody in the right alignment so we can get there in a good pace, on time, so nobody gets left behind, these sorts of things. And so it's reasonable to want to find people to build systems for our government that have that type of perspective. And so I think that if we can have, people that are reasonable about their worldview and their life experience and are really willing to humble themselves in the right perspective, which isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking less about yourself and more about like how you can be in service to other people, and how you can champion for other people's excellence and success, and how you can provision, accommodate, and steward for them, and how you can give them a sense of like offering that is a promise to do all you can, how you can, in all the ways you can, to do the right thing at the right time, the right reasons, for the right way, to benefit everybody. And when you fail, because everything can't be perfect all the time, you do what you can to correct for those mistakes, no matter what it takes. I think that is something that we can bank on. That is something, is a promise, that is a hope, that is a potential, that is something that is workable, right? In the systems. It's something that is a tangibility that we can coalesce around and say, it's reasonable to be about this, you know. We can experience it for ourselves. We can see that potential through you. You know, we can trust in what you're saying, you know, and we can sense that your heart is in a really good place and that you're willing to, you know, accept the massive responsibility of being trustworthy. So in everything that I said is like, we have to consider how we can do this thing we call government, how we can together create an ever more perfect union. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to advance the right ideas? How are we going to afford people the capacities and the capabilities to involve? How can we create a welcoming experience and invite people into that welcoming experience that they can thrive on? You know, how can we instill confidence? How can we support, you know, accommodate, steward? How can we just be reasonable about what we're offering? And to do so in such a way where it isn't about like these pointless, senseless, unnecessary, out of the realm of like relevancy to the situation at hand, you know. The final thing that I want to speak on, because it matters to me so much, is the approach to immigration in the United States. The current administration is becoming tyrannical, exploitative, abusive, manipulative, abusive in its powers, and is setting a stage for, you know, weaponizing the government to be able to actually inflict intentional harm on individuals that they would single out. You know, they're threatening citizens that are naturalized. They're threatening citizens that were born here to kick them out because they don't adhere to some ideological format. They've now emboldened the ICE to have so much money, power, influence, capabilities, free reign to exact this rough draft concept of policy for immigration, which really amounts to nothing more than just wreaking havoc, hunting down humans for sport and for the performative qualities, so they can get a little snapshot video to show the world of how low America has fallen from its sense of dignity for human life and human prestige, human value. And the fact that, you know, the money that's going to invest in this system of perpetuating violence against innocence is just setting a terribly horrible, god-awful stage. We have more and more of a surveillance state than we've ever had before, and they're all doing it under the guise of patriotism. Immigration system has to be, we have to get all those bad hombres out. We have to be able to, you know, dig into the IRS systems and social support systems and all of these other, you know, information systems so that we can find these bad hombres, right? So we can extract them and get them the hell out of our nation. That's a very dangerous position. Again, going back to the, like, can't distrust these decision makers because their sensibilities about it is everybody that's against me is a bad hombre. And so it just takes one out of step, out of alignment from their interests. You become an obstacle standing in their way, and they will find a way to get rid of you. And they are perverting and distorting the justice system, that the judicial branch is giving him more and more power and sway over the outcomes of the nation without any checks and balance, neutering Congress and their role to help to keep an equal separation of power so we're safe from tyranny, and wielding that power and that force against people to do violence against them, causing detrimental harm to innocent children who, they don't know any better. But now what you're teaching them is to know fear, uncertainty, doubt, exploitation, abuse, threats of harm, putting them in detention camps, rounding up human beings and treating them like cattle. In the meanwhile, these people are covering their faces because they know what they're doing. They wouldn't be able to show their face to their family if their families knew what they were doing. They wouldn't be able to show their face in public. It's very much along the lines of why the Ku Klux Klan wear headdresses, these little white masks over their face. It was because there were these people in positions of power that not anonymity, that sense of nobody knows who I really am, gave them a protection to the point where they know that they could do anything uninhibited. And they did awful things. And that is exactly what's happening right now with ICE. And it's not what America stands for. And going back to what I was saying before about the incoming president has to take the mess that's made and untangle it, right? How to build out anew from where we're at. I'd just like to leave on what I would do in this situation. First of all, way too much money going to this program, right? It's an extraordinary amount of money that's invested in a weaponization, and that is a gross perversion. That is such a waste. But what I see as potential, that a president coming in, given that fine context, situational context, historical context, what can you do with what you got to work with sort of thing, would be to advance that branch of enforcement in the government, to be about establishing safe spaces for the integration of immigrants to come in to America with warm welcome. I think of it very much in terms of what I really think that our police forces should experience. Like, get back into the public service. Serve and protect, and to remember that you're not serving and protecting one group of people, but rather to serve and protect our sense of sanctity. You are providing for the common defense, which isn't just about having enough guns to go against people, or enough, secret police to go after these people you perceive as being, threats or enemies, but also about capitalizing on that soft power of creating an atmosphere by which everybody can live safe and sound. I very much believe in the concept that I've spoke about in other videos, about creating gateway cities. They're cities of cities, and it's this template to help to build up a consistent criterion, high standard of living for every city throughout the entire nation, adhering to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals so we can all live within planetary boundaries, and, steward welfaring for everybody to live the good life. And one of those things included a gateway city, which is to create along our borders, which are many, points of integration for immigrants to come to and be welcomed into experience that they can thrive on, and to be integrated into our nation in a way where they can participate and contribute to our sense of we're all being stewards together, and we need as many hands on deck as possible. And if you're willing to come and be a part of this experience, positively contribute and participate, your benefit is going to be this safe and sound place. And so I think that there's potential to redirect the spirit of intent that Trump is vesting into this system, and to let it be about healing the rifts that he's causing and his cohorts causing about immigration, to help to dispel the fears that citizens have been, ingrained in their brain by, Fox News and, people in the MAGA cohort, that you have to fear immigrants, they're bad hombres, right? We need to educate people through community cohesive networking experiences, events where we come together to find that you don't have to fear your neighbor. And immigrants are our friends and they're neighbors, they're fellow human beings. And while they may not think like you or act like you or adhere the same culture as you or the same, come from the same histories or the same sensibilities, and their tastes and aversions are different from you, and they may not speak the same language that you understand, there's a universal language of love that we can all understand when we are in that sense of love, respect, appreciation, unity, and a sense of we are cultivating a safe and sound space of peace. In that, we transcend the barriers of language. We transcend the barriers of, divisions of class, color, creed, nation of origin, color of your skin, orientation, all of these things, like, it all goes away. And instead we are interrelating with one another about something that is wholly unique to the human experience, our capacity to build relationships with one another, and to let it be intentionally developed off of a sense of respect, building rapport, loving yourself and others, letting everybody make choices and decisions for themselves, allowing that, natural establishment and development of natural bridges of trust amongst one another. When you have safe spaces, you can let your guard down. You're not so looking out for, who's the bad guy in this situation. And any government that is trying to make you think that there's bad guys everywhere is disturbing your peace. They are fundamentally destabilizing domestic order. They are intentionally unsettling your sensibilities to keep you in perpetual states of fear, because it makes it easier for them to exploit you. And today it might be the immigrants that are the bad guys. But tomorrow, with the increasing surveillance state that they're creating, any person that steps out of line from their little ideal will very easily be targeted and taken out. We cannot have such a system that exists. It is a violation of your privacy. It is a limitation of your life. It is stealing away your future and the future of generations to be able to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There is nothing reasonable about what they are trying to approach. And given the opportunity for a good leader to come in, to take what they have and to turn it into something good, to rewrite history so that we can correct our mistakes, so we can start doing the right thing. They would see this monstrosity of this violent weapon, this tool of evil in the form of ice, and turn it into something that's nice. You know? Build out the gateway cities, bring golden doors of opportunity, live up to the ideals that are impressed upon us in that beautiful poem, The New Colossus, that is imprinted on the Statue of Liberty. Bring me your tired, you're sick, you're homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I open my lamp, I put it up by the golden door, and I say, this is a light into the nations. This is for everybody to know this is safe space. And not just in a sense of like, come here, stay here permanently forever, but to understand that, you know, the changing climates, we're going to have climate refugees, we have conflict refugees that are coming in. We need to bring people into a safe space that they can thrive on, and so they can develop their capabilities and tune into the best mastercraft of their human ingenuity, so they can go out into the world and help to make it a better place. That would be something that would be worth America being defended as what we are defending. We are worth defending because we are such a place that we cultivate stewards here, and that's our biggest export. This is our greatest export. And in order to export that, we need to bring in the imports of more and more immigrants under the collective protection of, this is a safe space. We're welcoming you with invite. But of course, being reasonable about it, so that we don't have to have, you know, fear and uncertainty and doubt. Assuage our fears. Let everybody in a transparent way know this is what we're doing. You know, this is how we're bringing people in. This is how we're making sure that the people that are coming in really do have our best interests at heart. You know, so that people who are here don't have to worry about a, you know, destabilized situation. And that's something that we can bank on, because it's a sense of tranquility, right? Which is something that we said we're supposed to be about, you know? Here in America, we are provisioning, providing, accommodating, and stewarding the sense of tranquility, sense of peacefulness, peaceful accord with ourselves and others. And we're making an ever more peaceful world outside, because that does the good work of, you know, the soft power of making sure that we're better protected, because less people are like, death to America, you know? It's like, I'm glad that America exists, because they've taken on the responsibility to make sure that the world is a better place, and that we don't have, you know, to compete with other, you know, forms of government or ideologies. We just need to surpass them, and we can and should be a good model. And I believe being a nation of welfaring stewards, and to bring in people into that experience, helping to make them welfaring stewards as well, and then to deploy them into the world as, you know, stewards doing the good work and of ambassadorship of, you know, this is what it's going to take. Help to rebuild communities, reestablish integrities, bring domestic order to places beyond. Then it's not about everybody coming in desperation to come to America, but with intention. And to come here so that they can go back home and to make their homes safe and sound as well. And in that way, we are exporting peace every day. And I see that potential in immigrants. I see that potential in, again, reimagining and revisioning what ICE is and turning into something that's nice, something that we can be proud of. I've always felt that immigration has been like this source of prestige. It very much resonates with my heart, the poem, The New Colossus, the concept of the Statue of Liberty, the sense that we can be a light into the nations. We can lift our lamp beside the golden door. We can invite people in. We know that there's so much out there that's uncertain, that's unsafe. We are your refuge. And that's what America should be about. Because when we extend that to everybody else in the rest of the world, we're not just, exporting peace, but we are reinforcing it. We are making it our integrity bound commitment. This is what we're about. This is our, national identity. This is why I believe that embedding the stewardship archetype into the American identity, devoting ourselves to be a ever more perfect union of a nation of welfaring stewards, accommodating, provisioning, and stewarding us all, and working towards a common ideal of making the world a better place, really making a free world, free from fear, free from intimidation, free from corruption, free from violence, free from the perpetual sense that the world makes no sense. It's reasonable, it's just, it's fair, it's right. And it's heart-filled. It compels you in your heart. It's like, if I'm going to do anything, I want to be a part of that. That's what I want to be about. And all the useless and the antiquated, the infighting and the meanness and the terribleness, those are just behaviors that you've been trained because it's the environment you've grown up in. When we start changing the environment, we change your behaviors. You're not a person thinking that you have to, be bad to belong. You belong to good humanity because inherently in your heart you're a good person. You just need someone to bring out that best version in you, to champion for your goodness, to want for you to be more than what you can imagine yourself to be right now, to encourage you, to, provoke you to be your best, do the right thing, damn it, what's the good thing? Be good. Model that. Encourage it, embrace it, establish it, innovate for it, incentivize it, and constantly be thankful and grateful for it, that this is a good thing. And I appreciate you so much for taking the higher road and the integrity that's necessary to see this through, to commit yourself to this level of personal development, to say that I'm going to be a good person, I'm going to be a part of this experience. I recognize the great potential of being a steward in collaborative, cooperative, best interest of all parties involved, mutualities of welfaring stewardship. I want to be all about it, man, because I see it's going to help me to live the good life. It's going to help my children to live a good life. It's going to bring a promise to future generations and generations and generations to come, and the futures that they're going to build out in. We're paying it forward a beautiful opportunity of what is to come for them to be so much more wonderful and expansive and liberating and free and secure and peaceful and loving and wonderful than what we have now. And we don't be jealous about the future that they're going to have, which is going to be so much better than what we have. We are extending that with hope. This is our living legacy, and to know with pride that you were a part of that experience. You here right now making the decision for yourself to be a part of this is what's going to make all of the difference in the world tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And it's going to take work. It's hard work, As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Nothing comes by easy. If it does, then there is something about it that is not right. The easy path is, as much as it might be grooved in and seem like it's easy, really it's setting you up for greater difficulties down the line, because it's limiting your capacity to see the potentials around. You have to be a conscious person, aware of your circumstances, know where you are, when you are, thus therefore who you are and how you can be in service to the world, because you know you belong in this place at this time, so you can make a great difference in improving the outcomes that you experience and everybody else gets to experience, you know? And I think that with the best interest of humanity at heart, and that everybody being welcomed into the experience, distinguishing that there is a deviant echelon of society that is very selfish and self-centered, that doesn't care about the collective positive good outcomes that welfare and stewardship could provide for everyone. And they want to convince you that this is a bad idea or it's the wrong way. They're going to deceive you and lead you astray to make you think that it's better to fight against this system than it is to free yourself from the limiting paradigm that they're creating for you, to say that the world is so messed up that it will never be able to be fixed. Peace is not possible, you know? Don't let them convince you of that. You know, be a part of the criterion echelon of society. We're all in this together. You know, we're all cooperating together spontaneously, not through force, you know, in an enforcement of this rigid system, but a force for good that we're all about. Like, it seems optimistically naive, but realistically, it is just a inspiring and like motivating, welcoming invite, you know? Be a part of this, you know? As they say, like, come to the good side. And to feel compelled and that, like, that's what you want to be about. And to, you know, whittle down the deviant echelon of society. I don't anticipate we're going to be able to get rid of them altogether, you know, because there's some people that just refuse to self-develop. They refuse to fix their mistakes. And so they have to live in that perpetual, you know, sense of, you know, self-orientation that prevents them from seeing beyond. They are, you know, incoherent and incomplete. But we have to continuously be, you know, in this together in order to model for them that there is a different way, with hope that they can redeem, you know, but acceptance that they have to be free to choose for themselves, you know, because it's important that we have that sense that we're free to make our own choices. This is the same spirit of, you know, our amendments, free speech, free press, you know. Our freedoms are not just about these like fun and cute and, you know, great ideas and, you know, this like don't infringe on my rights sort of thing, but like this is the way of being, and you have to live them in order to reinforce them. That's claiming your power. And I just wish everybody would just take back the power and want for a better world that we all belong to. And you know, generating the concept of we're going to have to get everybody thinking in new ways and approaching, you know, in a problem-solving kind of approach, to not turn this into some sort of like, you know, fight against like good and evil or something to that. You know, the conflict is within. It's literally about like settling within yourself the sensibilities of good humanity and aligning and adhering to it in such a way that is inspiring and role modeling for others that this really is a good way of being. So that they don't have to, you know, live through this perpetual sense of like, I've done wrong and I should be ashamed of myself, but rather like redemption into something that's much better, you know. Welcoming invite into a redemptive experience of like living out in goodness, you know, devoting yourself to that ideal so that it doesn't matter like what happened in the past. What matters is how you're going to show up in the world right now. What matters is this moment, because who you are and how you choose to show up, you know, is making all the difference in the world for the future potentials that are going to either make your love and your joy and your happiness and your bliss expand, or it's going to shrink your world and your world experiences. And the world becomes a very dark place when you think that you are, cornered or limited or bound, unreasonably with that. I really hope that America can, take this opportunity to open your eyes to the idea that we are all in this together. We're brothers and we're sisters. We are all one human race. And we ought to listen to our heart songs, our sense of who we are in the world and how we're choosing to show up, how we, live life every day and what we experience and pursue. Like, that should all resonate with the beat for one purpose, and that is to actualize an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, peaceful, stable, sensible, reasonable, and reliable world that we can be faithful to, and from that experience great benefits from, and live out in perpetual experience the sense of the good life. So with that, I'm grateful for your valuable time, attention, and consideration, knowing that I'm coming from a place of being compelled to speak my mind and speak my heart, because it's important that my voice is resonant with as many people as is possible who may be willing to open themselves to the possibilities and to not play on notions of fear, and to consider what may be beyond what we now know, and to be willing to, participate and contribute and to enjoy the experience of being a part of something that's extraordinary that we can build on together. I am just but one person. There's only so much that I can do. The world is going to take a lot of work, to become this extraordinary, wonderful, brilliant place. And I know that while I can do a lot, I can't do this alone, but we can. And so I'd like to welcome you with invite to the opportunity to experience something together in terms of aligning our interests and to connect at a deeper human level, and to see what we might be able to do together, spark that inclination that there really is something worthwhile to build on together, and with a sense of hope that it's going to be something that is not just, nice, and not just pretty or, funny, or, in some weird way, mysterious and alluring, but also a sense of that's where I belong. I am meant to be here at this time. I see the answers to the questions that I've had my whole life, in that vision that we begin to build and share together. And we need to communicate that with one another. And my honest to God hope is that I can continue to present this stuff as a hope, as a potential, as a promise, that building something like this together will make for a world worth living in, a world worth defending, and a unique and beautiful and fun relationship that we can build with one another. With that, again, thank you for your valuable time, attention, and consideration. Until next time, be well.